This story takes place in the house where my family and I grew up about 15 years ago. I was around 6 years old, and my little brother Carlos was only 3. While I don't remember every detail clearly, most of the story comes from what my older siblings, Anna, Rosa, and the others, told me. At the time, Carlos seemed to have an imaginary friend. At least that's what we assumed. He would often go down to the basement and have full conversations, giggling and playing as though someone else was there. We used to sneak up on him, listening through the vents or peeking into the basement. He'd play games like peekaboo and even laugh as if someone was responding. Since he never mentioned a name, we just called this mysterious presence friend. One day it was just the 4 of us at home. Anna, Rosa, Carlos, and me. I was in the kitchen making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for Carlos and myself, while Anna and Rosa were in the living room watching TV. Carlos, as usual, was in the basement playing with friend. As I walked past the basement door, I heard the sound of a ball bouncing and Carlos's small voice calling out, "Throw it!" Something about the way he spoke made me uneasy. I had always been afraid of Carlos's imaginary friend, so I didn't dare go down there alone. Instead, I went to Anna and asked if she would come with me to get Carlos. She agreed, and we held hands as we walked to the basement. The basement stairs curved halfway down. We descended the first few steps and then turned the corner to go the rest of the way. As I peeked around the corner, I caught sight of Carlos. What I saw froze me in my tracks, and I immediately pulled back, terrified. I whispered to Anna, asking her to look. Together, we peeked again and watched for what felt like 30 seconds before screaming and running back upstairs. This is what we saw. Carlos was bouncing a ball, but the ball would stop in midair, then return to him as if someone invisible had caught it and thrown it back. We bolted into the living room and jumped on the couch with Rosa, who demanded to know what had happened. Breathlessly, we told her everything. Rosa didn't believe us at first and insisted on seeing for herself. Reluctantly, we followed her back to the basement. This time, we walked all the way down. Carlos was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the floor, staring across the basement with a blank expression. Rosa knelt down and asked him, "What's wrong, Carlos?" He didn't respond. Then she asked, "Where's the ball?" Carlos finally answered, "He took it." Rosa hesitated and then asked, "Who took it?" Before Carlos could reply, the ball rolled out from the far left corner of the basement. It slowly made its way across the floor until it bumped into Rosa's foot. Without another word, she picked Carlos up, and we all sprinted upstairs, hearts racing. This incident left us shaken for days. While most of the details come from Rosa and Anna's accounts, the memory of that day remains vivid in my mind. The way the ball seemed to return to Carlos, as if an unseen person were playing with him, still gives me chills. It was the kind of thing you can never unsee, and I'll never forget it. This is a story my sisters, Anna and Rosa, told me about an unsettling experience they shared years ago. At the time, Anna was 12 and Rosa was 16. My siblings, as you'll find out, have had many paranormal encounters individually, but this one stands out vividly. It was a typical school morning around 6:30 a.m. Anna was in the bathroom, getting ready for the day. Suddenly, she heard someone faintly calling her name. "Ayananea." The voice sounded distant, unfamiliar, and strange. First, she ignored it, but then she heard it again, just as drawn out and eerie as before. Thinking it might be Rosa, Anna went to her sister's room to check. She found Rosa fast asleep. Gently shaking her awake, Anna asked, "Were you calling me?" Rosa, still groggy, replied, "No, I'm sleeping." "Why?" Anna explained that she had heard someone calling her name, and it seemed to come from the attic. Rosa shrugged it off and went back to sleep. Anna, still uneasy, returned to the bathroom, finished getting ready, and left for school. Rosa didn't go to school that day, and later in the morning, she mentioned to our mom that Anna had heard a strange voice calling her name. She also claimed she had heard the sound of marbles falling from the attic. Mom didn't pay much attention. Rosa was known to exaggerate even back then, and the rest of the day passed uneventfully. By evening, the household settled into its usual routine. Everyone was home by 4 p.m., Dinner was at 7 p.m., and bedtime was at 10 p.m. Rosa and Anna usually shared a room. But that night, Anna decided to sleep in the living room with our brother Salvador, leaving Rosa alone in their shared bedroom. Around 12:30 a.m., Rosa was still tossing and turning, struggling to fall asleep. She described the night as eerie, with an oppressive thickness in the air. Feeling hot and uncomfortable, she got up to open the door in hopes of cooling the room down. It helped, and she finally felt herself drifting off, until she heard a sound that made her freeze. Marbles. It started faintly but unmistakably. The sound of marbles falling. The noise seemed to come from the attic above the hallway outside her door. Rosa lay completely still, listening carefully, trying to determine if it was real or her imagination. The sound grew louder and more distinct. Marbles seemed to bounce out of the attic, down the hallway floor, and into her room. She couldn't see them falling, but she could hear them clearly. The marbles hit the footboard of her bed and ricocheted off the stereo in front of her. Rosa's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the marbles hitting the stereo. Terrified, she stayed frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. The marbles stopped falling from above, but then she heard them under her bed. It sounded as though someone was flicking them, playing with them. It was possible for someone to be under the bed since the frame was high enough for a person to fit. As a child, I remember crawling under that same bed during hide-and-seek games. Finally, Rosa couldn't take it anymore. She let out a scream, yelling for our mom. Within moments, Mom rushed into the room and turned on the light. She found Rosa curled up on the bed, visibly shaken. "Mom, look under my bed. Do you see marbles?" Rosa asked, her voice trembling. Mom bent down and looked, and to her shock, there were dozens of marbles scattered under the bed, some still rolling. Mom asked Rosa what had happened, and Rosa explained everything. She also admitted to exaggerating earlier that morning about hearing marbles, but now it was no exaggeration. Rosa, despite being 16 years old, refused to sleep in her room that night and spent the rest of it in our parents' bed. The next morning, I remember clearly seeing Rosa and Mom gathering the marbles. Mom was furious. She demanded that we find every single marble in the house and throw them away. From that day on, marbles were completely banned from our home. Even now, the memory of that night creeps me out. The sound of those marbles bouncing, the sight of them rolling under the bed. These are the kinds of things you don't easily forget. First, I want to say I can't believe I forgot about this. My pregnancy was such a blur that much of it feels hazy now. However, the beginning of my pregnancy stands out clearly, especially this experience. This happened when I was about 2 months pregnant, staying in my ex-boyfriend Daniel's house. I was severely ill. I hadn't eaten more than a cracker a day for weeks and was in and out of the hospital due to dehydration. Even water made me throw up. I couldn't sleep in my own bedroom because the smell of my blankets made me nauseous. I avoided Dan entirely, even his scent triggered vomiting. Instead, I moved into the guest room, barely leaving except to use the bathroom. Dan's mother cared for me during this time, bringing me crushed ice and whatever food I could tolerate. Dan wasn't allowed near me, and the isolation made me feel more depressed than I'd ever been. I missed Dan so much, his touch, his presence, but I couldn't stand to be around him. I hated hearing his voice from outside the room, knowing I couldn't see or hold him. I barely spoke to anyone, not even my family, except for brief conversations with his mom. Most of the time, I felt like I was losing my mind from being confined to that room. To make it worse, I started having vivid nightmares. Every night, I dreamed of an old man standing by the bed, silently watching me. I'd wake up screaming. Some nights, I felt a cold draft, even though the heater was on. It was November in St. Louis, after all. There were times when I felt the weight of someone sitting on the bed, but when I looked, no one was there. One day, out of boredom and curiosity, I started going through the closet. Inside, I found a box of old medical supplies. As I dug deeper, I came across clothes that looked like they belonged to an older man. The clothes smelled musty, and the odor made me vomit into a nearby trash can. As I sat crying, overwhelmed by sickness and loneliness, the wardrobe door suddenly opened, and a red quilted blanket fell out. The door shut immediately after. My sobs stopped as I stared at the blanket, my fear momentarily replaced by confusion. I picked it up and placed it back on the shelf in the wardrobe before crawling back into bed and falling asleep. Hours later, I woke up drenched in sweat. Kicking the blankets onto the floor, I turned to face the wall and cried softly, feeling utterly hopeless. Exhausted, I eventually drifted off again. I was startled awake by a loud slam. I shot up, only to find the red quilted blanket draped over me. Shaken, I glanced at the clock. It was 6 p.m. Feeling weak and dehydrated. I struggled to get up, opened the bedroom door, and collapsed in the hallway. Crawling toward the kitchen, I eventually passed out on the floor. The next thing I remember was Dan shaking me. His voice panicked. "Are you okay?" he asked. I couldn't answer. I could hear him speaking, but his voice seemed distant. He gave me a sip of water through a straw, then carried me to the car. On the way to the hospital, I finally spoke. "Dan, who lived in your house before you? Who stayed in the guest room I've been sleeping in?" Dan hesitated before replying. "I used to sleep in that room, but when my grandpa moved in, we gave it to him. It was the closest to my mom's room, so she could take care of him when he was sick." I asked, "What happened to him?" Dan explained that his grandfather had died from cancer. One night, his mom found him lying on the floor next to his vomit. I started crying and asked why they let me stay in that room. At the hospital, I was given medication designed for cancer patients to manage my severe nausea. For a while, I started to improve. During this time, Dan began sleeping in the guest room with me, as I still couldn't tolerate the main bedroom. But after a few nights, Dan admitted he felt uneasy in the guest room. He said he often felt as though someone was watching him. We moved to sleeping in the living room until I recovered enough to return to the main bedroom. Once our baby was born, we turned the guest room into her nursery. We installed a monitor with a camera to watch her while she slept. That's when strange things started happening. Some nights, we'd see movement near her crib on the monitor. Her toys would go off by themselves, and we'd hear shuffling sounds in the room. Each time, Dan would go check, but he never found anything. This happened so often that we began to suspect it was his grandfather's spirit watching over our daughter. Though it frightened me, I never felt his presence was harmful. I think he was simply looking out for her. While I didn't know him personally, I hope he was acting as her guardian in his own way. Up until a couple of years ago, I had never had any sort of paranormal experience, nor have I had one since. But this one incident continues to intrigue me, and I'd love to hear what others think about it. About 2 years ago, my boyfriend Corey moved into a townhouse off Olive Road in St. Louis with 3 other guys who were in town for school. There was nothing unusual about the place initially, just a typical college rental. The first strange thing I noticed was how my dog Hobbs reacted to the kitchen. Hobbs, normally calm and friendly, was absolutely terrified of it. He would stand at the edge of the kitchen, where the carpet met the tile, barking and growling at seemingly nothing. His hackles would rise, and he would refuse to step into the kitchen. It got so bad I had to move his food and water bowls into the dining room because he wouldn't even enter the kitchen to eat or drink. At the time, I brushed it off as Hobbs being weird. The next odd incident happened one night when I was in the living room with Corey, my friend Kelly, and one of the roommates, Jason. We were watching The Devil Wears Prada with all the lights off. The 2 other roommates, Ian and Matt, were out for the evening. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise, like a glass being thrown against a wall. We all jumped up to investigate. First, we checked the kitchen but found nothing. Then we headed downstairs to the basement. The basement had a short hallway with a bedroom on the left, a bathroom on the right, and a laundry room at the end. In the laundry room, we had set up a beer pong table which was about 10 feet away from the hallway. The hallway had thick carpet, and the ceiling light had a heavy glass fixture covering it. When we turned on the light, we were stunned. The glass light fixture hadn't just fallen, it had completely burst. Tiny shards of glass were everywhere, even on the beer pong table. It didn't make sense. If the fixture had fallen, it might have broken into a few pieces, but this was hundreds of tiny fragments scattered violently around the room. The thick carpet and the weight of the fixture made the explosion even harder to explain. We were all freaked out, even Corey, who has always been skeptical of ghosts. We took pictures of the mess because it was so bizarre. After that, I began to understand why Matt, whose bedroom was in the basement, often slept on the couch upstairs. He had mentioned before that the basement gave him an uneasy feeling, even though he couldn't pinpoint why. Another strange event happened one night while we were all watching football. Ian had a plate of hot wings in his hands and was about to sit on the couch. As I watched, a picture frame from the side table flew off and landed face down in his plate. I saw it with my own eyes. Ian jumped up, startled, and asked if anyone else saw it. I immediately said, "I did." The most unsettling incident, however, happened just before Corey moved out of the townhouse. It was around 3 a.m., and we were asleep when Corey's phone buzzed with a text message. He got up to check it, and when I asked who it was, he looked at me strangely and handed me his phone. The message was from his friend Vinny, someone who had only been to the townhouse once to pick up a beanbag chair and had no knowledge of the strange events we'd experienced. The text simply said, "Ghost." I was absolutely petrified. I insisted Corey call Vinny immediately, but there was no answer. The next night, we ran into Vinny and his girlfriend Carly at a party. We asked him about the text, but he had no idea what we were talking about. Carly confirmed that they had gone to bed at 11 p.m. after watching a movie. Vinny even let us check his sent messages, and there was no record of the text. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Vinny isn't the type to play pranks or joke about something like this, especially since he didn't even know about the ghost. I know it sounds unbelievable, but everything I've shared is 100% true. I'd really like to know what others think, especially about that text message. Could it have been something paranormal? Or is there another explanation I'm missing? Out of all the ghosts I've encountered in my life, this one is the hardest for me to talk about. It reaches into a part of me that I'd rather not revisit, touching on feelings and memories I sometimes wish I could forget. It happened in the spring of 1994, in May to be exact, a time when life was incredibly difficult. I was juggling 2 jobs while trying to attend school part-time. My marriage was unraveling, and though I didn't know it at the time, I was suffering from end-stage renal disease, which would eventually require a kidney transplant. Every day felt like a monumental struggle, and I went to bed each night hoping I wouldn't have to face the next day. Despite everything, my wife's large, close-knit family offered moments of reprieve. They were always gathering for birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, and other celebrations. I admired their closeness, as my own large family wasn't as tightly bonded. Sherry was my wife's cousin. She was tall, with strawberry blonde hair and striking blue eyes. She had an elegance that reminded me of classic Hollywood stars like Grace Kelly or Doris Day. People were drawn to her, not just for her beauty, but for an intangible grace she carried. She stood out, a presence you couldn't ignore. Sherry and her husband, Tom, a policeman, often hosted us. Tom and I would talk about his work, while Sherry and my wife chatted about crafts and life. We all got along well, and I enjoyed our time together. One spring, a relative announced their upcoming wedding. Plans were made, tuxedos rented, and the ceremony went off without a hitch. The reception followed in the same building, keeping the joyful energy alive. As the evening unfolded, my wife joined a group of relatives she hadn't seen in years, leaving me to sit alone, quietly letting my mind wander. When the music started and couples began moving to the dance floor, my wife noticed my boredom and suggested I dance. Pointing to Sherry, who was sitting with her kids, she encouraged me to ask her. I approached Sherry, and we laughed at the novelty of the moment. It was our first time talking one-on-one. I asked about Tom, and her face fell as she revealed they were separated and filing for divorce. She shared her struggles, and I listened, offering what little comfort I could. But the conversation shifted, becoming lighter, more introspective. We talked about nature, butterflies, and the simple joys of life. She spoke with a soulfulness I deeply related to. For a few hours, we connected in a way that transcended the struggles surrounding us. That evening left a mark on me. At future family gatherings, Sherry and I would often find ourselves on the dance floor, sharing quiet conversations and fleeting moments of connection. Though nothing inappropriate ever happened, I cherished those dances more than I could admit, and I sensed she did too. By the fall of 1993, Sherry was a bridesmaid at another relative's wedding. Seeing her in a peach gown that night took my breath away. She was radiant, her beauty magnified by an effortless charm. For a moment, I couldn't look away, and when our eyes met, her smile told me she was aware of the effect she had on me. Later that evening, emboldened by alcohol, Sherry sat on my lap, her body leaning into mine. It was a gesture that felt both innocent and deeply charged, and I was too stunned to react. My wife noticed, her green eyes flashing with anger. Though the moment passed, it left a scar. After that night, we saw less of Sherry, and the unspoken connection we shared faded into memory. Months passed. Life settled into routine, though I often thought of her, wondering how she was. Then came May 30th. My wife and I had gone to bed as usual. Around 11 p.m., I was drifting off when I sensed a light. I opened my eyes to see Sherry standing at the foot of my bed. She was wearing what looked like a nurse's scrubs and overcoat, and she smiled at me, lifting her hand in a gentle wave. It wasn't a casual wave. It was the kind you give when you're saying goodbye for a long time. Her presence radiated warmth, and then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. I sat upright, stunned, checking the clock. 11:05 p.m. convinced I wasn't dreaming. I shook my wife awake and told her what I'd seen. Sleepily, she dismissed it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been real. The next morning, the phone rang. My wife answered, and her face fell as she delivered the news. Sherry had died the night before. She had been driving home from her hospital job when her car broke down. While checking under the hood, the emergency brake failed, and the car rolled over her, pinning her beneath it. The accident happened around 11 p.m. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I knew I had seen her that night. She had come to say goodbye. At her funeral, the priest asked us to pray for her soul to leave purgatory. But I knew better. Sherry wasn't in purgatory. She had already found her peace. As I stood by her grave, the sun shone brightly, and butterflies flitted in the distance. It was a day full of the beauty she had loved, and I knew she was finally free. In her last hour, she had thought of me, and I felt grateful to have had the chance to say goodbye. In my lifetime, I've seen ghosts about 7 times. Of those, there are only 2 experiences I question, mostly because I can't fully trust my own recollections. But this story, one of my earliest memories, remains vivid and unforgettable. It's strange to think that one of my first memories in life is of seeing a ghost. Many might question how someone could remember something from when they were only 4 or 5 years old. But I do. Over the years, I've retold this story countless times to siblings and friends. My sister even recalls me telling her about it when I was 10, though I have no memory of that conversation. What I do remember is the experience itself, as clear today as the day it happened. I was very young, so much so that my mother still carried me around at times. For reasons I can't recall, my parents had put me to bed in their room that night. I remember lying in their large bed, wrapped in a blanket, while my mother turned off the overhead light and switched on a lamp on the dresser. The room was softly lit, enough for me to see clearly. The walls were painted that odd green color popular in the late 50s and early 60s, and the curtains were long and beige. I remember feeling happy, just lying there and looking around the room. I was staring at the curtains when they began to move, swaying as though a breeze was pushing them from behind. Caught my attention. I remember watching the movement for a moment before something appeared. It didn't fade into view like in old ghost movies. It was sudden, like someone had flipped on a spotlight. Standing before the curtains was a tall, hooded figure glowing a pale bluish green. It didn't reflect the light in the room. It seemed to emit its own soft glow. The figure was tall, about 6 feet 5 inches, as its hooded head reached the top of the curtains. Its form was like an old monk's robe, with a hood that flowed down to shoulders and an upper torso. But from the waist down, there was nothing. No legs, no arms, just a mist that faded into nothingness. It stood there for a moment, as though surveying the room. I could feel it watching me, even though it had no face. I don't remember what I was thinking, but when it started moving toward me, I screamed in terror. It had only taken a couple of steps when the overhead light snapped on, and my mother burst into the room. I don't recall seeing the figure vanish. I was too focused on her. She didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. I vaguely remember telling her about the scary man who came through the window. Like any parent, she assured me it was just a bad dream and settled me back into bed. But it wasn't a dream. We lived on the 4th floor of an apartment building with no fire escapes near the windows. The building had smooth brick walls with no ledges to climb. There was simply no way anyone could have entered that room except through the door. Over the years, people have tried to convince me it was a dream or some figment of a child's imagination. But I know better. I still vividly recall that moment. The details are as clear as other significant childhood memories, like the time I was badly burned by hot coffee and had to undergo skin grafts, or the first time I saw Santa Claus and cried because he scared me. That night with the ghost belongs in the same category, etched into my mind as something real and undeniable. Years later, one of my sisters told me she had seen something similar as a teenager in another house we lived in. She doesn't like to talk about it, but we both agree on one thing. Though the figure was frightening, it didn't feel threatening. Seemed more like it was watching us. Before I left home to join the Air Force, I had another strange encounter involving this entity. I was in the den playing with a new Polaroid camera. As I placed it on a shelf, it slipped from my hands. I caught it just in time, but the movement triggered the shutter. I didn't think much of it until I picked up the photo. In the picture, standing before a desk in the room, was the same tall, hooded figure glowing pale greenish blue. Beside it was the image of a woman with long hair, also visible only from the waist up. I left the room immediately. We kept that photo for years. I would look at it, unable to explain what I saw. But when my mother passed away, the picture disappeared along with many of her belongings. It's almost fitting. Just when you think you have proof of something paranormal, it slips away, leaving you with more questions than answers. Who are these spirits? Are they ghosts or are they something else? Angels, perhaps, sent to watch over us? I still don't have the answers. But one thing I know for sure is that I saw that figure, and it has stayed with me, watching silently throughout my life. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. July 23, 2008. This story takes place during a vacation to Missouri when I visited the famous Lemp Mansion. If you haven't heard of it, I recommend looking it up. Its history is both fascinating and eerie. My older sister took me on a tour of the mansion, which turned out to be a mix of lighthearted fun and deeply unsettling moments. What stood out most were my personal experiences during the visit, which I'll share here. From the moment I stepped inside, I felt an overwhelming energy in the building. My hair stood on end. The mansion, once a boarding house, had been the site of many deaths, ranging from pets to tenants and even members of the Lemp family itself. The tour guide, Betsy, mostly focused on William "Billy" Lemp and his tragic history, peppering her presentation with odd humor that we jokingly chalked up to her apparent admiration for him. One story Betsy mentioned only briefly was about Zyke, the illegitimate son of Billy Lemp. Though I doubted the name Zyke was accurate, it was the name she used, so we went with it. Zyke was reportedly the product of an affair between Billy and a maidservant, born with Down syndrome during a time when disabilities were highly stigmatized. In the mid to late 1800s, children with such conditions were often hidden away, and Zyke was no exception. He lived his short life locked in a small attic room, where he eventually died at the age of 8. As the tour continued, we made our way up to the attic, where we participated in a darkroom session. Betsy explained how it worked. The lights were turned off, and everyone strained their eyes, hoping to catch a glimpse of a ghostly figure, shadow, or mist. We were in the most haunted of the 2 attic rooms, and the atmosphere felt heavy. Betsy mentioned that Zyke sometimes appeared to tender, kind-hearted women, though her phrasing left something to be desired. Regardless, we all stood in silence as the lights went out. Within seconds, strange things began happening. People started pointing out fleeting shadows, but one figure caught my attention. In the doorway stood a shadowy silhouette of a woman in a long dress, surrounded by small orbs of light. She seemed to dart in and out of view as if playing a game, growing darker or lighter depending on where our attention was. It was fascinating, though not the most profound part of the experience for me. What struck me most was the physical sensation I felt. Almost immediately, my legs grew weak and shaky, as though someone were repeatedly pressing on the backs of my knees. My body bent forward slightly, making me feel hunched and unsteady, like I was being pulled toward the floor. My stepsister later laughed at how I looked, but I can assure you this sensation was not self-induced. I walked into the room feeling completely normal and walked out the same way. The moment Betsy announced she was turning the lights back on, the strange sensation vanished entirely. After the darkroom session, we moved downstairs to explore the mansion further, using dowsing rods. Everyone else seemed eager to contact Billy Lemp, but I chose to focus on an old man who was frequently seen sitting in a corner of the dining room. Surprisingly, the rods responded with clear movements, even contradicting my own expectations. It felt bizarre yet oddly amusing, as though the old man's mischievous personality was coming through. Before leaving the mansion, I told my sister about the strange experience I'd had in the attic. She was surprised and shared something that left me shaken. During an overnight investigation the previous summer, she had been shown the room where Zyke had lived, a space usually off-limits to visitors. According to her, the room was so small that Zyke couldn't stand up straight or move freely. He spent his short life hunched over, pacing back and forth in the confined space. She even saw grooves in the floor from where he had walked the same path for years. Neighborhood children would see him looking out the tiny attic window and cruelly taunt him with names like Monkey Face. Hearing this made me reevaluate what I had felt in the attic. My hunched posture, the weakness in my legs. It was as though I had physically experienced a glimpse of his reality. Though the experience wasn't frightening, it left a deep impression on me. In those 10 minutes of darkness, I felt not fear but an overwhelming sense of connection and empathy. It was as if Zyke's presence lingered, not to scare but to remind us of his existence. The Lemp Mansion is a place of history, tragedy, and mystery. My time there left me with questions I still can't answer, but it also gave me a story I'll never forget. I've been living in my apartment for about a year now. The building has a lot of history, and I still need to do more research. My apartment is located above an electronics workshop that repairs stereos, speakers, and electric pianos. Before it became an apartment and workshop, it was a movie rental store, and before that, it was a movie theater. Interestingly, this apartment is just 5 houses down from where I grew up, the same haunted house I've shared stories about before. As a child, my friends and I always felt uneasy around this place. Families rarely stayed longer than a year before moving out. I remember 3 boys who lived there once. 2 were twins my age, and the other was a year older. They often told us the apartment was haunted, and as kids, we believed them. One Halloween, they turned their basement into a haunted house. My friend and I joined them, and as we were being led through the dark basement, we stopped at an old, antique pop machine. One of the boys asked where it came from, and suddenly, a scratchy man's voice said, "Hey!" We all ran, even the boys. Later, they swore they hadn't planned it, and we never figured out what really happened. Years later, when I was 20, I got a job at a customer service call center. On my first day, I ran into a man I recognized from my childhood. He had lived in that same apartment years ago. We used to call him the Banana Car Man because he drove a bright yellow Cadillac from the 70s. At first, he didn't recognize me, but when I mentioned the apartment, he remembered. He told me it was haunted and shared his experiences. He said one afternoon, his son, who had been napping in what is now my daughter's bedroom, was found crying on the opposite side of the room with a broken wrist. His son claimed the man picked him up and dropped him. He also mentioned hearing heavy footsteps pacing the hallway at night. Then, he told me something that gave me chills. The Southside rapist had lived in that apartment before him. A year later, I was apartment hunting. My dad suggested I check out the apartment above the electronics shop. I wasn't interested at first, but eventually agreed to take a look. When I stepped inside, I fell in love with it. The hardwood floors, high ceilings, and spacious layout were beautiful, and the rent was only $550 a month. I moved in, completely forgetting the banana car man's stories. My first night there, the memories of his stories came rushing back, and I couldn't sleep for weeks. I had recurring dreams of a man in big boots storming into my room and grabbing me. Every night I woke up terrified. As time passed, I started to feel more comfortable, but strange things began happening. One night, I was on the phone with my brother Salvador when I heard heavy footsteps walk past the bathroom door. I whispered to him that I thought someone had broken in. Salvador rushed over, but by the time he arrived, I realized the front door was still locked, and no one was inside. He checked every room, laughed at me, and left, but I couldn't shake the fear. That night, I stayed awake with all the lights on. Over time, more unexplained events occurred. Items in the house would go missing and later reappear where I thought I had left them. My daughter's baby monitor, which had a video screen, became another source of fear. I often heard heavy breathing through the monitor and saw shadows moving near her crib. Each time, I checked her room, but the sounds and movements stopped as soon as I entered. My daughter, now 2 years old, often begs me not to close her door at night. When I ask why, she says she's scared of the monster. One of the most terrifying experiences happened while I was sitting in the dining room reading a book. Suddenly, a man's voice screamed loudly in my left ear, "H." It was a furious yell, not a frightened one. I was so scared that I ran out of the apartment and didn't return until I calmed down. I'm too afraid to investigate further. I won't use a Ouija board or try recording EVPs because I'm terrified of confirming that something is haunting my home. While I sometimes wonder if my cousin Neo is watching over us, as I mentioned in another story, I don't believe this presence is him. It hasn't harmed us, but it continues to scare me. Whatever it is, I just hope it doesn't mean us any harm. Since that day, I've had recurring nightmares about a man staring at me from my bedroom doorway. I've always brushed it off as a bad dream, nothing more. Nothing significant had happened recently, until one night, the Wednesday before my most frightening experience. It was around 10:30 p.m. I had just gotten out of the shower when I heard noises coming from my daughter Jasenia's room, directly across from the bathroom. I walked slowly to her door and listened. It sounded like someone was going through her toy box. I knew it couldn't be Jasenia. She was asleep in her crib and couldn't climb out. Quietly, I walked back to my room and woke my boyfriend, Adrian, pleading with him to check on her. Half asleep and confused, he refused, muttering something before rolling over. Frustrated, I grabbed a bat from the closet and walked cautiously into her room. I opened the door slowly, my heart pounding, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Feeling uneasy, I turned on the security camera in her room before returning to mine. I watched her room on the monitor for a while, but nothing happened, so I eventually fell asleep. That Friday, November 14th, 2008, I took the day off work. Jasenia and I were lying in bed around 11 a.m. She was watching cartoons and drinking chocolate milk while I tried to nap. We hadn't eaten yet, so when we got up, I headed to the bathroom. I left the door open, as closing it always upset her. While I was in the bathroom, Jasenia ran in, saying she couldn't find her chocolate milk. I told her she'd left it on the floor by my bed and to go check again. She ran off but quickly returned, insisting, "Nope, Mommy, I lost it." "You didn't even look," I said, urging her to try again. She backed up close to me and snuggled against my side. "Mommy, I'm scared," she said softly. "Why, baby?" I asked, puzzled. She made a small circle with her thumb and index finger and said, "I'm scared of the man and the little green star in your room." Her words sent a chill through me. I immediately thought of the stories the previous tenant had told me about the man who haunted his son in this apartment. I also wondered if she was describing an orb when she mentioned the green star. "Baby, there's no man in my room," I assured her. "Go get your milk." But she started crying. "Please, Mommy." "No, I'm scared." I decided to hold her hand and said, "It's okay. I'll come with you." "Show me the man." She hesitated, then whispered, "Okay." We walked slowly to my bedroom. As we reached the doorway, we both stopped. She fixed her eyes on something across the room that I couldn't see. Her face was blank, her expression unreadable, but she stared intently. "Where's the man?" I asked cautiously. She pointed toward the far side of the room. "He's right there," she said in a monotone voice, barely moving her lips. "What is he doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He's standing up and he's looking at us," she replied. I saw nothing, but her calm, detached manner terrified me. I grabbed her hand, turned around, and quickly walked to the dining room. I was more frightened than she was but didn't want her to see it. I told her to grab her jacket because we were going to Grandma's. As I zipped mine up, I stopped. This is my home, I thought. I shouldn't have to leave. He needs to leave. I canceled our plans and went about the rest of the day, pretending everything was normal, though my mind raced. I should also mention something that happened about a month prior. It was around 1 a.m., and I was sitting at my computer. The heater hadn't been turned on yet since it was still early fall and not too cold. Suddenly, I heard the beep of the thermostat buttons being pressed. I turned around, expecting to see Adrian, but he wasn't home. Then the vents kicked on. I walked to the thermostat and saw the display lit up, as if someone had just adjusted it. I turned it off and sat back down, but a minute later, it happened again. This time, I turned quickly and saw the buttons being pressed, by no one. I got up and turned the heater off again, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I even called Adrian, who was out at a bar, but he hadn't touched the thermostat. I had no explanation except that something paranormal was at play. After Friday's incident, I talked to my mom, who is deeply religious and believes in the presence of spirits. She comforted me, advising me to have the apartment blessed and to avoid being afraid. I'm considering asking this presence to leave, but I've read that engaging with spirits can sometimes give them more energy. Since it's frightening my daughter, I believe this entity is not harmless. I plan to have the place blessed soon. In the meantime, I've emailed my landlord to ask more about the tenants who lived here before. I want to know more about this man, or whatever it is. First off, let me say that what I'm about to share didn't just happen in Missouri. It's occurred in a couple of different places. I've only told a handful of people about this because I know how it might sound, but I promise you, it's true. We've all heard stories about guardian angels, how they help you in times of trouble or sickness. I just refer to mine as a guardian. It feels more fitting and gives it a masculine edge, I guess. My first encounter with what I believe to be my guardian happened when I was deployed overseas. I served as a turret gunner in a Humvee, which meant I was pretty exposed while we were on patrol. Back then, the newer versions of Humvees with full turret crowns weren't available to us. All we had were gunner shields for protection. We were traveling down an MSR, main supply route, and had to slow down due to the Ramadan marchers lining both sides of the road. The marchers carried flags and sang as they moved along, and the road was crowded. We took it slow to avoid any incidents, but it was still a tense situation. The area we were in was relatively safe. We had a decent relationship with the local nationals and the sheik in the area, but as any veteran of the Iraq conflict will tell you, situations like these can turn dangerous in an instant. As I was scanning the crowd, something caught my eye in my peripheral vision. It was an old man walking with a cane. He wasn't dressed like everyone else. Something about him stood out, but it was so brief I couldn't recall exactly what it was. Curious, I swung my turret around for a better look. At that moment, I heard a loud smack. A broken half-brick hit my gunner shield with force. It took me a second to realize what had happened, but if I hadn't turned to look at the old man, the brick would have hit me directly in the head. We didn't need to go after the person who threw it. The marchers took care of that for us. Our interpreter told us it was a 13-year-old boy. He was detained, questioned, and eventually released. Even now, thinking about how close I came to being seriously injured or worse still gives me chills. My second experience happened during a long drive home after a month-long school. It was a 22-hour drive, and I decided to make it in one go. I know some might criticize that choice, but it's what I did. The interstate was empty, so empty that I hadn't seen another car for a long time. Then, in my rearview mirror, I noticed a pair of headlights coming up behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as the car got closer, it started acting erratically. It would speed up, then slow down, then speed up again. Finally, the car pulled up beside me, staying there for a moment before accelerating slightly ahead. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the old man again, as clear as day. He was flagging me down. I instinctively hit the brakes, turning to follow the old man with my eyes. Just as I slowed, the car beside me swerved into my lane. It missed the front of my vehicle by mere inches. Shaken, I pulled over to look for the old man, but he was nowhere to be found. There were no vehicles off the road, no signs of anyone. I called out, but there was no response. Eventually, I got back into my car and finished my journey home, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. I know without a doubt that someone or something was looking out for me. The strange thing is that I don't remember anything like this happening when I was a child. These experiences have only occurred in my adulthood, and it's been about 3 years since the last one. Still, they've left a lasting impression on me. Whether you believe in guardian angels, protectors, or something else entirely, I know there's more to this world than we can fully understand. My guardian saved my life twice, and for that, I'll always be grateful. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My parents built my childhood home in the 1970s, and they still live there. The house is about 10 miles from the nearest small town, surrounded by dense, secluded land covered with 20-foot circular mounds that I was always told were created by Native Americans. As a child, I often heard strange, disembodied sounds in the house. It was so regular that it became part of the background of my life. I'd hear voices chatting in the next room, only to find it completely empty when I went to check. Sometimes the voices would shift to another room as I moved, or they would abruptly stop. At first, I thought it was my parents watching TV, but when I realized they'd already gone to bed, or weren't even home, I began to question it. This happened almost daily, whether I was the only one indoors or the whole family was home. It wasn't until high school that I started to think of these occurrences as strange or possibly paranormal. Before then, it was just a part of the house's ambience. Oh, it's those noises again. Around the same time, a new kind of experience began. Living with people, you instinctively learn the unique sounds they make. The timbre of your mom clearing her throat, the distinctive sound of your dad's boots when he comes in the back door. Sometimes, when I was home alone, I would hear these exact sounds. I remember one instance when I was sitting on the couch, and I heard my mother clear her throat. It was so close, as though she were sitting right beside me. But she wasn't home, she was at a meeting. These were not muffled sounds from another part of the house. They were crystal clear and unmistakably familiar. It made me question how many noises I had attributed to my parents over the years were actually them. On a few occasions, the sounds seemed to come from mid-air, right next to me, too close to mistake their source. I've often wondered if it could be something like telepathy or time slipping. Occasionally, I would be woken by voices. Once, a man said my name, and another time, I felt someone shake my shoulder and say, "I love you." At that point in my life, no one close to me had passed away, so I couldn't explain it as a loved one visiting. One of the more bittersweet memories I have of the house is something that no longer happens. From as far back as I can remember until my teenage years, I would hear music as I drifted off to sleep. Sometimes it was soft singing, other times a powerful, resonant melody. When I was little and asked my mom about it, she told me it must be angels singing. It was never frightening, and there was no logical explanation for it. My mom never sang to me at bedtime, and it wasn't like I was dreaming. It was simply beautiful, and I miss it. There was one incident, however, that left me unsettled. I had 2 friends over, and we all piled onto a 4-wheeler to explore one of the fields on my parents' expansive property. We stopped in the middle of the field for no particular reason when suddenly both of my friends became visibly distressed and insisted we leave. Once we were closer to the house, I stopped and asked them why they had wanted to leave so abruptly. They were both pale and shaken. They said they had heard a woman screaming, blood-curdling, like she was being murdered. I hadn't heard a thing. I suggested it could have been a mountain lion, as they're known to sound like screaming women, but I'd never heard or seen one in the area, and I hadn't heard anything unusual at the time. My friends later admitted that the entire property felt unnervingly eerie to them. A wild, unsettling energy that I suppose I'd grown accustomed to. On another occasion, the same two friends and I decided to camp in a different field. While they stayed up talking, I fell asleep by the fire. The next morning, they told me about a chilling experience they'd had that night. For about an hour, they heard something growling and making slobbery, heavy-breathing noises. It crept closer and closer to the fire until it should have been visible in the firelight. But they saw nothing. They were so shaken that they insisted on spending the rest of the night in the house. I vouch for both their credibility and their bravery. I've had other unexplained experiences with each of them, and far worse with one of them, so I trust what they told me. These experiences shaped my perception of the house and the land around it. For me, it's not scary, just mysterious, like the property has layers of history and energy that can sometimes peek through. It's fascinating to think about, even if I'll never fully understand it. This isn't exactly a spooky story, but it's something that's been on my mind for years, and I have questions I hope someone can help me answer. Back in 2005, I was bored during a summer with no job or school to keep me busy. One day, while driving with a friend, we noticed a small shop we'd never seen before. Curious, I pulled into the parking lot, excited to check it out. It turned out to be a metaphysical supply store, something I hadn't even known existed. I've always been interested in the paranormal, so walking into this shop felt like stepping into another world. We were greeted by an older woman who looked to be in her late 60s or early 70s. The store was filled with fascinating items, books, herbs, crystals, and even had a small museum. Among its displays were an original Ouija board from the 1700s and even a mummy. In the back of the store, I noticed a room set up for readings. I assumed they had a medium or someone who did tarot readings for customers. While browsing the glass cases near the register, I heard a man's voice behind me say, "You look like a September." I turned and asked, "What does that mean?" He smiled and replied, "You were born in September, right?" He was correct, and I couldn't help but wonder how he knew that. As I continued to browse, the man introduced himself. "My name's Mark," he said. "Sue, the woman by the door, is my mother. This is my shop, and she helps me run it whenever I'm busy or have a client for a reading." Mark went on to explain that he had a gift he'd developed since childhood. At first, it was scary, but I learned to live with it. "Now I use it to help others," he said, smiling warmly. Sue chimed in, "Mark's gift is strong. I have some abilities too, but nothing like his." I told them about my interests in the paranormal and Ouija boards, but admitted I was too afraid to use one. Sue warned me about the dangers of Ouija boards, saying they shouldn't be used without proper knowledge and respect. She guided me to a bookshelf and handed me an instructional book about Ouija boards. Then, she led me back to the glass cases and showed me something she called her favorite item in the store, a pendulum. "This is something I think you'll enjoy," she said, her tone serious but kind. I ended up buying a pink crystal pendulum with a gold chain, along with the book. I was immediately captivated by the pendulum, and when I got home, I couldn't stop experimenting with it. It answered all my questions accurately, and I became obsessed with using it. Sue had explained the importance of closing each session properly, which I always made sure to do. One evening, before going to a movie with friends, I decided to use the pendulum with a homemade Ouija board. My first question was, "What is my boyfriend's name?" The pendulum began to swing, spelling out D, then A. Just as it was moving to the next letter, my friend burst into the room, telling me we had to leave. In a rush, I crumpled the Ouija board and threw it in the trash, completely forgetting to close the session. Later, at a Taco Bell before the movie, I went to use the bathroom. I was the only one there. As I washed my hands, the stall door behind me suddenly swung open with such force that it hit me in the back. Startled and angry, I turned around, expecting to see someone, but the stall was empty. I checked the stall, but no one was there. Shaken, I ran back to my friends, hyperventilating as I explained what had happened. They were a little creeped out but brushed it off, and we changed the subject. At the theater, I decided to use my pendulum in the dark to try and address what had happened. I asked if it was the entity from earlier, and the pendulum responded with a clear yes. I asked it to leave, closed the session properly this time, and nothing like that ever happened again. However, my obsession with the pendulum only grew. I became so attached to it that I wouldn't let anyone else touch it. If someone did, I'd become angry, even violent. One day, I accidentally left it on my dresser before going out, and when I returned, it was gone. My mother confessed to putting it in a bottle of holy water and throwing it away, saying she believed it was unhealthy for me. Though I was furious, I bought another pendulum. That one, too, disappeared mysteriously. Since then, I haven't stopped thinking about pendulums, and I plan to buy another. Here are my questions. Do you think my attachment to the pendulum is purely psychological, or could something else be pulling me toward it? And do you think the incident at Taco Bell was connected to my forgotten session? A few years ago, we were exploring the area near an old township founded in the 1800s. That's when we came across Sycamore Church Road, a desolate path that seemed to lead straight into the middle of nowhere. There's even a tiny, one-room church on the road with about 10 pews, 3 rows on each side, a short pew in the front of each row, and another pair up front. The church feels eerie at night, but so far, nothing strange has happened during our investigations there. Further down the road, there's an old railroad bridge. The first time we approached it, I stopped the car about 15 feet away and couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the other side. The sensation was so overwhelming that I refused to drive past it. Since then, I've been down that road several times, and it's always unsettling. I've heard things, seen shadowy figures, and felt an unshakable presence. One night last fall, Brian, my boyfriend, and I went out with our paranormal research team to explore Sycamore Church Road again. We drove past the railroad bridge and parked in a gravel roundabout near a hiking trail. While observing the area, one of our team members swore they saw a figure standing against a hiking sign, but I was looking elsewhere at the time and didn't catch it. Over the next few visits, I personally saw shadow figures and felt overwhelming sensations of being watched. That night, as we left the roundabout and started driving back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us. It was as if a heavy presence pressed against my back. I kept glancing behind us, unable to stop imagining some figure chasing the car. Even more disturbing was how long it felt like it took to leave that road. Much longer than it had taken to get there. We eventually made it back to our apartments, but the night wasn't over. Our neighbors, also team members, were babysitting their friend's kitten. Normally, this kitten was playful but would calm down quickly when held. However, when they brought it over that night, the kitten was completely frantic, running, hissing, and refusing to be calmed by anyone. I blurted out, "I think something followed us home, and it's seeing or sensing it." It was the only explanation that made sense to me, as I still felt like something was lingering from that road. Later, after everyone left, Brian fell asleep on the couch while I stayed up researching. Around 4:30 or 5 a.m., I stepped outside for a cigarette. I hadn't been out for even a minute when I felt something watching me. My attention was drawn to the playground to my right, but I didn't see anyone. Then, I felt like something was at the bottom of the breezeway stairs to my left. I heard faint creaking sounds, as if something was climbing the stairs. I stood up, ready in case it was an animal, and peered around the corner. I didn't see anything, but the sound of something moving up the stairs grew louder. I froze in place, and then whatever it was suddenly bolted up the steps. Terrified, I screamed, ran inside, and slammed the door shut. I've been scared before, but this was different. I felt truly threatened, like my life was in danger. For a brief second, I looked through the peephole, but immediately got the mental image of something pacing outside my door. I backed away, heart pounding, hyperventilating, and shaking so badly I couldn't calm down. I paced for 30 minutes before I could sit, and I didn't sleep until the sun came up. Some might argue it was just an animal, but I disagree. My neighbor's black lab puppy, Bear, was incredibly fast, but whatever chased me that night was far faster than any dog. I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it was. To this day, that night haunts me. I haven't experienced anything that intense since, but the memory still leaves me shaken. It's something I'll never forget. When I was about 8 years old, my family moved into a house where I lived with my mother, her boyfriend, and my 2 younger sisters. From the very beginning, my sisters and I felt uneasy about certain areas of the house, especially the basement, laundry room, and garage, which were all connected. We often dared each other to spend 5 minutes alone down there, but none of us ever lasted long. Nothing specific ever happened to us in those areas, but the uneasiness was constant. When I turned 12, my sisters got tired of sharing a bedroom, so I was moved into the semi-finished basement to free up space for them. That's when things started to change for me. The basement had always made me uneasy, but now it became my bedroom. I began noticing strange noises, creaks, taps, and other sounds that I couldn't explain. To drown out the noise, I relied on things like the furnace, the TV's sleep timer, or a loud fan to help me fall asleep. I never slept with my back to the laundry room door and often let my dog, KC, sleep in bed with me for company. The first encounter. My first clear experience happened one evening between 7 o'clock and 9 p.m. I was in the basement organizing my CD collection while my parents watched TV upstairs, and my sisters were in their room. Out of nowhere, I heard someone clearly yell my name. It wasn't muffled or distant. It was sharp and distinct, but I couldn't tell if it was a male or female voice. I ran upstairs, thinking it was one of my parents, but they both looked at me in confusion and said they hadn't called me. My sisters laughed when I asked them and said they were too busy talking about boys to mess with me. Uneasy and confused, I went back downstairs. The next day, I got a crucifix from my grandmother to hang above my bed. The second encounter. The second experience was far more unsettling. Around 3:30 a.m. one night, I was sound asleep with KC, my toy poodle, curled up next to me. Suddenly, KC started barking at the laundry room door. Annoyed and half asleep, I told him to quiet down and drifted back to sleep. About 15 minutes later, I woke up to a loud noise that sounded like the manual garage door being opened. Panicked, I hit the radio button on my alarm clock, hoping the sudden noise would scare off whoever, or whatever, was causing the sound. The noises stopped immediately, and KC bolted upstairs in fear. I spent the rest of the night sitting in bed, staring at the door, unable to sleep. The third encounter. The scariest experience happened a few months later. When I was younger, my grandfather had given us a very old piano that belonged to my great-grandmother. It had been in the basement long before I moved down there. My youngest sister was supposed to use it for her piano lessons, but she never got past the basics. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was woken by the sound of someone awkwardly playing the piano. Random, clumsy chords and melodies. Assuming it was my sister, I mumbled, "Jillian, go to bed." Without even looking, the noise stopped, and I fell back asleep. A short while later, it started again. This time, irritated, I said more firmly, "Jillian, if you don't stop playing that damn piano, I'll make you stop." Again, the noise stopped, and I fell back asleep. The third time, I woke up and found myself lying on my back. I sat up, ready to confront my sister, but instead, I saw a greenish-yellow figure sitting at the piano. It wasn't my sister. I froze, staring at it for what felt like an eternity but was probably just a few seconds. Finally, I managed to whisper, "What the F***?" in a calm tone. The figure turned to look at me. Its face was horrifying. Its eyes had a dead, maniacal stare, and its mouth stretched into an unnatural smile that seemed to reach from ear to ear. Then, without warning, it shot into the piano and disappeared. Terrified, I bolted upstairs and spent the rest of the night on the couch, wide awake. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the basement for weeks. Eventually, I worked up the courage to return, but the uneasiness never went away. A few months later, I moved to New York to live with my father. Reflection. My family has since moved out of that house, and I haven't heard about any similar experiences from the new occupants. While the events were terrifying at the time, I'm somewhat grateful for them because they sparked my lifelong interest in the paranormal. But I'll never forget those nights in that basement. When I was 8 years old, I experienced death for the first time, when my baby brother passed away. Since then, it feels like I've been haunted by something I can't explain. The first terrifying incident happened when I was 9. We were living in Caruthersville, Missouri, and one evening after taking a bath, I was lying in bed reading. I put my book on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, just relaxing. Out of nowhere, I felt like someone was sitting on my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't call for my mom, no matter how hard I tried. My mouth was shut tight, and all I could manage were muffled cries of, "Mama, Mama, please help me." Tears rolled down my face, but my body stayed frozen. It felt like hours passed before I could finally scream out loud. As soon as I could, I bolted off my bed and ran to the kitchen where my mom was. I tried to explain what had happened, but my mom, a deeply religious woman, immediately thought of the devil. She bought me my own Bible the next day and told me to pray, "I am a child of God," if it ever happened again. For a week after that, I refused to sleep in my room. I stayed in the living room until my parents insisted I return to my bed with the Bible. Terrified but determined, I opened it to the Lord's Prayer, prayed, and went to bed. I stayed awake for hours before finally falling asleep, but I was so relieved to wake up in the daylight. From that day on, my Bible never left my room. Years later, time passed, and by the time I was in 6th grade, things seemed fine. One day, some friends came over and wanted to see my room. While we were there, one of them noticed my Bible by my bed and started messing with it. Somehow, it ended up lost, and to this day, I don't know what happened to it. That night, I said my prayers as usual and went to bed, not thinking much about the missing Bible. But as soon as I lay down, something grabbed me, started at my feet and slowly moved up my body until I couldn't move. My heart was racing, and all I could think was, "Where's my Bible?" Panicked, I began to repeat the prayer my mom had taught me, "I am a child of God." On the 3rd repetition, whatever it was let me go. From that moment on, I always kept a Bible by my head. A dark figure. Years later, we moved to Kennett, Missouri, where I met my fiancé and got pregnant with my daughter, Maya. My pregnancy was high risk, so I spent a lot of time on bed rest. One evening, my family went to church, and my sister needed my Bible, so I let her borrow it. I thought I'd wait for them to return on the couch, but I wasn't feeling well, so I went to the bedroom instead. I was sitting up in bed, watching TV with the lights off, when something told me to look up. In the doorway stood a dark, hooded figure. It didn't move, just stood there, staring at me. Fear paralyzed me. Then, in an instant, it was no longer in the doorway but leaning over me. Its bony hand slowly reached for my belly. I tried to move, to pray, to do anything, but I was frozen. At the very last second, I managed to turn onto my side and close my eyes tightly, whispering my prayer over and over, "I am a child of God." When I finally looked again, it was gone, searching for answers. I've never been able to get clear answers about what's been happening to me. These experiences still happen, no matter what I try. I've had my home blessed, prayed endlessly, and done everything I can think of. But I just want to understand what this is and why it keeps happening. I've seen a lot of negativity surrounding Ouija boards, but I still feel compelled to share what I experienced several months ago. It's not something I've shared easily, even with those closest to me, but I believe it's important to get it out. I've known about Ouija boards for most of my life and have always regarded them with respect rather than as a game. I understand that opinions differ, but I'm not here to change anyone's beliefs. I'm sharing this as a form of release, not to convince anyone of what I experienced. Earlier this year, I had my first encounter with a Ouija board. It wasn't the most active session, but it sparked a deep curiosity in me. After that, I held several sessions, some more active than others. The idea of making contact with another realm was both exciting and intriguing. I only held these sessions with people I trusted, those who understood the seriousness of what we were doing. One afternoon, I spoke with my 13-year-old sister, Lex, about Ouija boards. She confessed she'd always been curious but had never wanted to try it unless it was with someone she trusted completely. I hesitated at first but decided it was better for her to experience it with me rather than someone less experienced. I made sure she understood it wasn't a game and that it needed to be treated with respect. She agreed, and I decided to hold a session with her. A few nights later, after I got home from work, we held our first session together. Her friend Jay was there, and I carefully explained the rules to both of them. That session was more active than I'd expected. The spirit we contacted seemed distressed but not hostile. We even captured a clear EVP of the spirit asking for help. After that, some sessions were successful while others were quiet. A week later, Lex's friend Taz joined us for another session. We started in Lex's bedroom as usual, with the board on the floor and the lights off. While we made contact with two spirits, a male and a young girl, neither wanted to communicate, so we decided to take a break and change the location. We moved the board to Lex's bathroom, a decision I now realize was a huge mistake. From the moment we began, the atmosphere changed. The air felt heavy, and I sensed an overwhelming negativity. The energy from the planchette was intense, but I tried to stay calm to avoid alarming Lex and Taz. When I asked if there were any spirits present, the planchette moved to yes. It identified itself as male, but when I asked its name, I felt uneasy. I won't share the name here. The tension in the room grew stronger. I asked for its age, but it wouldn't answer. Instead, I asked, "What year were you born?" "A very long time ago." I heard the words clearly in my mind, in a male voice that wasn't mine. Startled, I looked at Lex and Taz, but they didn't seem to hear it. My instincts screamed at me to stop, but before I could, the planchette began to move on its own. It spelled VU, and then VEW. My heart raced as I tried to process what was happening. I felt something sinister and took control. "No, nobody is viewing anyone," I said firmly. "We are here to talk, not to view. If you don't want to talk, we're closing the session." The planchette quickly moved to no and began spelling view again. We forced it to goodbye, and Lex turned the lights on. As we tried to gather ourselves, Lex gasped and said, "Oh my God, he's so mad at you right now." She explained that she felt him move through her when I suggested putting the board away. Taz insisted we leave the bathroom, so we went to the back deck. Outside, Lex began complaining of intense pain in her back. She gripped the chair and couldn't stand. I placed my hand on her head and demanded, "In the name of Jesus Christ, leave her alone." When she finally stood, I checked her back. There was a red handprint in the middle of her back, along with scratches on her chest. Lex was visibly shaken, and we tried to figure out what to do next. She sat cross-legged in the chair, refusing to look at me. I demanded she make eye contact, and when she finally did, her expression was no longer her own. Her eyes and demeanor changed. Her mouth curled into a sinister smirk, and she chuckled softly. It was unsettling. "You think that's going to affect me?" I said, staring her down. "You need to stop. That's my sister, and I'm not letting you hurt her." Before I could say more, Lex lunged at me, her voice deep and male as she growled, "I'll get what I want." Taz screamed as I pushed Lex off me. Moments later, Lex was crying, with no memory of what had just happened. We removed the Ouija board from the house after that night, along with others I had. Despite cleansing rituals and prayers, Lex and I are still tormented by him. Comes and goes, but the experiences haven't stopped. I haven't touched a Ouija board since and don't know if I ever will again. I've learned that using a Ouija board is a gamble. You don't know what you'll encounter, and if you're unprepared, it can quickly spiral out of control. I was only 8 years old when she first came to me. From that moment on, my nights were never the same. My family had just moved into a new home on the south side of Kansas City. One night, I woke up to see my grandmother standing in the open doorway of my bedroom. I said hello to her, but she didn't answer. I said it again, but still no response. That's when I looked closer. This person wasn't my grandmother. She was tall and thin, with long hair, and her gown seemed to float as if it were blowing in the wind. Then I realized I could see straight through her. I was staring at a ghost. Frozen with fear, I pulled the covers over my head and prayed she would go away. The next morning, I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I was sure no one would believe me. I could hardly believe it myself. A few nights later, I woke up to find her in my room again. This time, she was standing at the foot of my bed. I wasn't scared this time, just confused. I could see her clearly, and she was looking directly at me. I don't know how long we stared at each other. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Once again, I kept it to myself, not even telling my sister, who was sleeping right next to me. What was happening? Did I really see her? Or was it just a dream? I didn't know what to think, but I was scared. I thought ghosts only haunted old, creepy places, not houses like ours. The next experience is something that still gives me chills when I think about it. I woke up to see her standing right next to my bed, only a few feet away, looking down at me. This time I could see her face clearly. Her eyes were sunken and dark. Her expression was one of deep sadness and pain, almost unbearable to look at. I was terrified. I can't even put into words how much fear I felt at that moment. As quickly as I could, I pulled the covers over my head and cried for my mother. The next morning, I told her what I saw, but she brushed it off as a bad dream, saying there was no such thing as ghosts. That was the last time I ever saw the lady in white. I didn't talk about her again for years, until one night when my sister and I had a sleepover. We were in the basement telling ghost stories when I decided to share my experience with the lady in white. As I told the story, I noticed my sister's face growing pale. She looked terrified, and I stopped mid-sentence. That's when I realized she had seen her too. My fears were confirmed. It wasn't just a dream. I had seen a ghost. But why? Who was she, and why had she come to me and my sister? Years later, I heard another story about a girl who also had a night visit from a lady in white. My neighbor told me that this girl's father had been so disturbed by what happened to his daughter that he started researching the area's history. He found a story from the 1800s about a trapper who had lived in the region. The trapper often left his wife and 2 daughters alone while he went on long trips. One day, while he was away, the 2 daughters wandered into the woods and disappeared. By the time the trapper returned, his wife was frantic. They searched for days but never found the girls. Heartbroken and unable to accept that they were gone, the mother continued searching for them, until she, too, disappeared. After hearing this story, everything made sense. The woman I saw, the lady in white, was the trapper's wife. She was still searching for her daughters, even after all these years. To this day, I wonder how many other young girls on the south side of Kansas City have been visited by her, still searching, still hoping to find her lost children. My name is Luke, and I live in Brookfield, Missouri. I've never had any real ghostly experiences before the events I'm about to share, though I've always had a vivid imagination. About 4 years ago, during my sophomore year in high school, something happened that I still can't explain. We lived in an old house that my dad had renovated, except for my room. My bedroom used to belong to my brother and hadn't been updated, so there was no insulation, and it was always chilly, especially at night. I didn't think much of it and went to bed as usual. That night, I fell asleep without any trouble. But then I started having one of those dreams where you feel awake. You can think, feel, and even try to open your eyes, but you can't. The dream was strange. I saw a red flashing light, and I remember feeling like my legs were crossed, even though they weren't. I kept trying to open my eyes, thinking I was stuck in the dream. Then I started to feel my sheets tighten around me, and a cold sensation spread over my body. At first, I wasn't scared. I thought I was just half asleep, caught in some weird dream. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I felt a wave of relief, until I tried to move. Suddenly, it felt like a massive weight was pressing down on my chest. I couldn't move. I managed to lift my head slightly, but it felt like something had me pinned to the bed. The pressure was overwhelming, and although I couldn't feel specific points on my body being pressed, It felt like an invisible force was holding me down. I couldn't scream or call out, but even if I could, I didn't want to. I was frozen in terror. Then, as abruptly as it started, the pressure disappeared. I shot up in bed, gasping for air like I'd just been released from a tight grip. I bolted into the living room and woke my mom, trying to explain what had happened. She didn't know what to make of it, but I was adamant. I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I spent the rest of the night in the living room with the TV on, too scared to go back to my room. After that night, nothing strange happened again, at least not for a long time. But recently, something happened that brought it all back. Now I'm in college, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Moberly, Missouri. One night, a similar experience shook me to my core. I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep, when I started to feel the same pressure again. My sheets tightened around me, and I opened my eyes much more easily this time, but things quickly took a terrifying turn. As I tried to get up, my vision went completely blank. It felt like something lifted me up and turned me upside down. I couldn't tell if I was really being moved or if it was just in my head. It felt like one of those moments when you're falling out of bed in a dream. Then, just as suddenly, I felt the bed beneath me again. I opened my eyes and saw that my covers were thrown off onto the floor. I lay there frozen, completely terrified. I live alone in a town where I barely know anyone, and the isolation made it all the worse. I still don't know what happened during those nights, but they've left a mark on me that I can't ignore. About 2 years ago, my mom and I moved into a charming little split-level duplex. When we first toured the house, I didn't feel anything unusual, no strange presence. But I didn't venture into the room that would become my mom's, either. The day she signed the papers, I thought, finally, a house without any annoying ghosts. Couldn't have been more wrong. We moved in about a week before my 16th birthday in April. Everything seemed fine at first, but within a week, things started happening. One afternoon, I was lying on the couch watching TV after school. My dog, Sarge, was near the front door when he suddenly jumped up and ran across the living room. I looked up just in time to see the front door swing open. I was confused because I was sure I had locked it. Locking doors was a habit of mine. Besides, the door was heavy and dragged on the carpet, so it wasn't easy to open. I convinced myself it must have been the wind, but deep down, I knew that explanation didn't sit right. A couple of weeks later, I had a strange experience upstairs. The layout of the upstairs was simple. My mom's room was on the right at the top of the stairs, and to the left, the hallway led to the bathroom and my room at the end. As I reached the top of the stairs, a random image popped into my head. A woman with very pale skin, black curly hair, and a flowered gown. She didn't look happy. The vision left as quickly as it came, but I suddenly felt compelled to glance into my mom's room. I didn't see anything, but the air felt heavy, as if her presence lingered there. That's when I realized the house wasn't as ghost-free as I had hoped. Over the 2 years we lived there, she made herself known in subtle ways, especially to me. She seemed to enjoy getting my attention, but it was never threatening. For example, I have a thing about half-open doors, cabinets, and drawers. They either need to be fully open or completely shut. When I got home from school, I'd always close whatever was left half-open, only to find them half-open again minutes later. It even happened with the pantry door. I'd grumble and shut them, but she would open one right behind me. Once, frustrated, I shouted, "Quit it!" and couldn't help but laugh. She wasn't scaring me, just messing with me. One night, I was trying to sleep, and she kept opening my closet door. Every time I got up to close it, it would be open again by morning. It was like she loved annoying me, and I couldn't help but feel a strange kind of amusement in her antics. When my mom stayed at her boyfriend's house on weekends, I was often alone. One Saturday night, I was on the couch watching a movie, my legs curled up beside me. Suddenly, I felt pressure on my foot, as if someone was pressing their finger into my sock. The indentation stayed for a second, and then the pressure slowly lifted. I wasn't scared, just surprised. "Why are you poking me?" I muttered, glancing around the room. It didn't feel threatening, just like someone was there with me. The first time she physically touched me, though, was a different story. I was 17, talking to my boyfriend on the phone after school. I was slouched on my beanbag, my body resting on it with my feet on the floor. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand swipe across my thigh and lower back. I froze. There were no drafts, no fans, and the air conditioning wasn't on. Sarge wasn't in the room either. Panicking, I shouted, "Oh my God!" and ran outside. My boyfriend tried to come up with logical explanations, but nothing made sense. It left me shaken. The scariest experience happened late one night. I was quietly leaving the bathroom, careful not to wake my mom. I turned off the hallway light and started toward my room. As I glanced at the banister, I froze. Underneath it, I saw a face. It wasn't the full head, just the face. Bright white, with wide eyes and an abnormally large open mouth. It didn't blink or move, just stared at me. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, unable to look away. Finally, I bolted to my room, slamming the door behind me. Couldn't sleep that night. When I told my grandma about it, she explained that people who die in pain sometimes retain their final expression. The thought made me feel sad for her, even though it had terrified me. Another time, I was watching a movie and texting a friend. After putting my phone down on the arm of the couch, it spun around rapidly, as if someone had flicked it. Startled, I grabbed it and said, "Don't." That incident really unnerved me. Sarge also seemed affected by her presence. He avoided the kitchen, stretching his neck to peek inside but never fully entering. Sometimes he would stare at the stairs or follow invisible movements with his eyes. When we left him home alone, he often looked scared, and I'd tell her, "Don't pick on him, leave him alone." Eventually, I told my grandma about everything, and she brought her ghost hunting equipment to investigate. In my mom's room, which always felt heavy and sad, we used an EMF meter to detect energy. It spiked in a corner near the closet, the same corner where I always sensed her. We prayed for her, asking her to move on into the light. After that, the room felt lighter, the sadness lifted, and I knew she was happier. Even now, when I visit, I sometimes feel her presence. She doesn't bother me much anymore, but she occasionally teases my mom. In a strange way, I miss her company. She was just a sad soul looking for peace, and I hope she's happy now. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My boyfriend and I moved into our current apartment on July 1st, 2009, and I couldn't have been happier. The atmosphere felt refreshing, the energy vibrant, and it was a much-needed improvement from our previous apartment. Being closer to town and near my family was an added bonus. I was eager to leave behind the negativity that seemed to cling to our old place and start fresh in this welcoming new space. I've lived in this area since 2004 and started visiting back in 2000 or 2001, so I'm familiar with all the roads, including the lesser-known back routes locals use to avoid tourist traffic. To reach my apartment, you travel down one of the main side roads, and then take a left onto another shortcut road about a quarter mile before the main drag in town. This road leads to the grocery store, Walmart, and my apartment complex. I've driven this route countless times, so I like to think I know every nook and cranny along it. A few days before Halloween in 2009, I was driving home during the day. I had just turned onto the shortcut road leading to my apartment when, without warning, I felt my attention sharply pulled to the passenger side window. It was strange and sudden. Through the trees, thick with foliage in that area, I noticed a worn-down structure that vaguely resembled an old house. It was weathered and crumbling, but what struck me was the energy radiating from it. In my mind, I could vividly see an older man standing on what might have been a porch. His arms crossed tightly over his chest, glaring with an air of territorial defiance. Intrigued, but busy, I brushed it aside for the moment. The next day at work, I texted my younger sister, Lex, asking if she'd ever noticed the house near our complex. She said she had and suggested we check it out together. We made plans to visit it in daylight, and I even considered doing a paranormal investigation with friends, including my best friend Rachel, who was visiting for Halloween. On Halloween day, Lex, her friend Natasha, and I walked to the structure. Up close, it was less imposing than it had seemed from the road, but the energy was just as strong. The building was essentially a shell with no flooring, so we walked on dirt. Under a weathered overhang, there was an old table, cheap-looking and dirty, nearly falling apart, with mismatched chairs that gave off an odd, unsettling vibe. A few steps further, we found a long metal gate, like one you'd see on a farm. We pressed on and entered a small room that required stepping up to reach. Inside was another table, littered with books and magazines scattered across the surface and the floor. The collection ranged from novels to physics books to National Geographics, dated anywhere from the 1930s to the 1970s. Moving into a larger open space, the layout became more confusing, making the structure feel like it could have been a barn at some point. There was a loft accessible by a ladder attached to the wall. While Lex and Natasha stayed below, I climbed the ladder for a better view. Near the center of the loft, amidst the junk and debris, was a single small chair. As soon as I noticed it, an image flashed in my mind. A young boy sitting there, his demeanor sad, anxious, almost desperate. The surrounding clutter vanished in my vision, replaced by a cleaner, simpler scene. It was brief, but I couldn't shake it. When I turned to descend the ladder, I was overcome with a strong sense of despair, as if someone didn't want me to leave. I paused, turned back toward the chair, held out my hand, and whispered, "It's okay. It's not going to be okay." I spun around at the faint, distressed voice of a young girl. "Lex, did you say something?" I called down. "No," Lex replied, puzzled. Natasha also denied speaking. Their confused expressions told me they weren't lying. It hadn't been them. I shared what I heard, and neither could account for it. I performed a brief EVP session, hoping to connect with the spirits I sensed, the boy, the girl, and the older man I had seen in my mind. Unfortunately, the session yielded no immediate results, and we left with plans to return later that night. That evening, Rachel and I set out for the structure around 2 or 3 a.m., equipped with flashlights, digital cameras, and a recorder. Rachel immediately picked up on the same presences I'd felt earlier. A little girl, a little boy, and an older man. Even though I hadn't shared anything with her beforehand, we attempted to connect with the little girl, who seemed the most present. Rachel got the names Emily for the girl and David for the boy. At one point, Rachel was overwhelmed by a flood of emotions and visions Emily shared with her, reducing her to tears. I won't go into detail about what Rachel saw, but it left her visibly shaken. As we were leaving, Rachel suddenly stumbled forward, pushed from behind. I was in front of her and saw nothing, but she was certain of what had happened. Back at the apartment, we reviewed the voice recordings. Most of it was uneventful, but about 2/3 through, we captured a faint male voice whispering, "Leave, go away. You don't want to know." It was chilling, clearly not either of us. Around 4:30 a.m., I finally went to bed. Lying there with my eyes closed, I experienced something I still can't explain. In an instant, the darkness of my closed eyes shifted, and I was standing outside the structure in broad daylight. I saw a little girl in a light lavender dress with shoulder-length dark blonde hair running past me in slow motion. She turned her head slightly, giving me a glimpse of her profile before the vision ended as abruptly as it began. I opened my eyes, wide awake, baffled. The image was vivid, not like a dream, and when I described it to Rachel, she confirmed it matched Emily's appearance exactly. I don't know what to make of these events. I know what I felt, what I heard, and what I saw. Whether it was the spirits tied to the structure or something else entirely, the experience has stayed with me. There's more to this story that I hope to share soon. My boyfriend and I moved into a duplex just over a year ago. For most of that time, we had roommates, and I never felt uneasy or noticed anything strange. However, everything changed after December 2009, when our roommates moved out following our engagement. We wanted the place to ourselves, but I couldn't have anticipated how things would shift after that. At first, I chalked everything up to nightmares. I started waking up very suddenly around 3 a.m. almost every night, feeling incredibly uneasy. The feeling was strongest in the corner of our bedroom near the door. It was as if something was watching me from there, just staring. What's strange is that this only happens when my fiancé is either asleep or not at home. During the day or while he's awake at night, I feel completely fine. But at night, when I'm alone in the room, the sensation becomes overwhelming. A few nights into experiencing this, something happened that even spooked my fiancé. He told me the next morning that while I was sound asleep, completely dead to the world, he'd heard one of our two Great Danes growling. They sometimes growl if someone walks by the house, but usually they're looking out the window when they do. This time, our dog was growling at the wall just outside our bedroom door. She was sitting there, staring straight at it, growling deeply. My fiancé left a light on before coming back to bed. He admitted that it made him uneasy, and when he told me the next morning, it left me feeling even more unsettled. Things escalated on the night of January 24th. I woke up suddenly again around 3 a.m., fighting the urge to get out of bed to use the bathroom because the feeling of being watched was so intense. The corner of the room by the door seemed to pulse with that same eerie energy. I tried to ignore it and fall back asleep, but I kept hearing a knocking sound. It wasn't loud, but it was rhythmic and persistent. The knocks would come a couple of times, stop, and then return. I couldn't pinpoint where they were coming from. It was as if they moved from one wall to another, definitely inside the house. Since we live in a duplex, I tried to tell myself it might be the neighbors, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The knocking kept me awake for nearly an hour. The most alarming experience happened on January 26th. I went to bed early that night, leaving the door open because I don't like sleeping alone with everything that's been happening. I even put in earplugs to block out the sound of the TV in the next room, where my fiancé was watching something. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the stereo in the living room blasting a Stevie Nicks song at full volume. It was so loud that it felt overwhelming even through my earplugs. What made this incident particularly chilling is how the stereo works. It always resets itself to a low volume and CD mode when you turn it on after being off. For it to suddenly turn on by itself at such a high volume felt completely unnatural. These events seemed to be escalating, becoming more noticeable and harder to dismiss. At first, I thought I could tolerate sharing our space with a harmless spirit, but waking me up in the middle of the night with blaring music doesn't exactly feel friendly. I'm growing concerned that this might get out of hand, and I don't know what to expect next. First, let me say that everything I'm about to share is completely true, as God is my witness. In 2008, after my father passed away, I inherited some life insurance money. My wife and I decided to use it to buy a bigger and better home in an older, upscale neighborhood. We searched diligently and even lost some earnest money on a new house that turned out to be too small for us. Then we found a beautiful brick home on a local realtor's website. At first, we weren't sold on it. We drove by several times over a 2-week span, convinced it wasn't for us. But no other house felt right, so we eventually decided to contact the realtor for a walkthrough. When we arrived, an elderly woman answered the door. She seemed frail and not entirely present, likely due to her age. Inside, the house was impressive, recently remodeled, even though it was originally built in 1976. However, one room, the old woman's bedroom, felt heavy. The air was thick, and there was an unpleasant odor. The realtor brushed it off, explaining that it smelled that way because she was being cared for in that room. I loved the house immediately, despite some minor repairs it needed. My wife, however, was hesitant. She wanted to keep looking, but I eventually convinced her. The same day we put down the earnest money, The Money Pit, a Tom Hanks movie about a disastrous home, was on TV. We joked about it being a bad omen, but that joke quickly turned into a chilling nightmare. From the moment we moved in, strange things began happening. At night, odd noises would keep us awake. Taps, bangs, and pops. Doors that we left open would be shut, and doors we left closed would be open. Lights we turned off would be on when we came home. Our ceiling fan made an incessant tapping sound, but only when we were awake. If we woke up in the middle of the night, the tapping would stop, only to start again after a few minutes. The tapping was so persistent that I eventually experimented with the fan, discovering that something was physically tapping it as it spun. The faster it ran, the more the tapping subsided, but after a few nights, even at full speed, the tapping would intensify again. Other things became increasingly unsettling. My wife's belongings would be moved to strange places during the day while we were at work. I began to realize that whatever was causing the disturbances didn't like certain things, like the movement of air from the fans. It was as if it were trying to make us stop using them. The nights became increasingly active. One evening, as we watched TV, a loud banging sound erupted from the kitchen, overpowering the volume. It sounded like something was striking a water pipe under the floor. I rushed to investigate, and the noise stopped the moment I turned on the light. I shouted, daring whatever it was to do it again. I turned off the light and walked away, only to hear the banging resume, loud and deliberate. This was the first time I truly felt like I was communicating with something beyond my understanding. Things escalated quickly after that. Invisible footsteps could be heard throughout the house, moving from the attic to the floors below. Sometimes they would walk right in front of us while we were watching TV. Other times they followed my wife around the house. I confronted it one night, demanding to know if it was good or evil. I asked it to knock twice if it was good and once if it was bad. It knocked twice, but I knew spirits could lie. Regardless, my challenge seemed to provoke it further. The disturbances in the old woman's bedroom grew worse, with loud bangs and pops, as if it were throwing a fit. The activity took a darker turn. Both my wife and I began waking up with scratches and bruises on our bodies. My wife was scratched deeply enough to draw blood on one occasion. The entity followed us out of the house, on drives, to work, even on trips. At night, the disturbances became physical. One morning, I was lying in bed when I felt the sheets around my neck tighten, as if I were being strangled. When I woke up, there were no marks, but the experience left me terrified. The most terrifying encounter happened one morning after my wife had left for work. I heard something pacing in the old woman's bedroom, and then it walked down the hall to my room. Suddenly, my bed began vibrating violently. I prayed to God and Saint Michael, and immediately, the vibration stopped. I heard footsteps retreating, with one dragging as if it were injured. Summoning courage, I jumped out of bed, swung open the door, and chased the sound down the hall, but saw nothing. I stopped when I heard faint whimpering, and then it went silent. We sought help from every source we could think of. A priest blessed the house, but the activity persisted. Psychics and mediums were called in. One even claimed the house was filled with spirits, controlled by an evil entity. They said a demonic dog guarded a portal in the basement and had corrupted the spirit of the old man, who they believed was the husband of the previous owner. The old woman, we learned, was a Holocaust survivor who had denounced God after her trauma. Her husband had died at work years ago, and psychics believed his spirit was still in the house, angry that we had moved in. After months of activity, we hired another psychic who seemed to clear out most of the spirits, but the main entity remained. The activity became less intense but still unsettling. To this day, we're unsure what to do. The bruising and scratching have stopped, but the occasional tapping and popping continue. Financially, the house has been a burden with constant repairs and bad luck. We've considered selling, but fear disclosing the activity might make it unsellable. For now, we take it day by day, relying on prayer and refusing to let fear control us. This experience has taught us to remain calm and avoid feeding negativity. It thrives on fear and chaos, but with faith and persistence, we've regained some control. We just hope this nightmare will eventually end. First, let me say that everything I'm about to share is completely true, as God is my witness. The bulk of our horrifying experiences with this entity has already been shared, but I wanted to explain the smaller details, things that have made our lives miserable. These seemingly small incidents added up, making it clear how persistent and malicious this entity has been. The first signs were subtle. The ceiling fan tapping, doors opening or closing on their own, and lights being manipulated. Early on, we noticed a strong smell of dog urine in the living room. The previous owners apparently had a house dog, as we found stains on the carpet that were hidden by furniture during our walkthrough. You could only smell it if you put your nose close to the carpet, but this entity seemed to amplify the odor. While watching TV, the smell would hit us out of nowhere. Even after having the carpet steam cleaned, the odor persisted, leading us to replace the living room carpet entirely. But the day the carpet was being torn up, I was driving the company van when the smell of dog urine filled my nose, burning as if it were right there with me. The entity became more visible over time. One early morning, while my wife was getting ready for work, she saw a shadow move toward the bedroom door. The handle turned, and the door slowly opened by itself. On another night, my wife went to bed early while I stayed up watching TV. She came running out of the bedroom, panicked, saying she had seen the black shape of a man rise up from the floor at the foot of the bed. Another morning, after my wife had already left for work, I saw something myself. As I lay in bed, a dark, squiggly mist floated above me, drifted to the window, and tapped on it loudly before disappearing. The entity didn't stop at disturbing our home life. It targeted our vehicles too. It would change dashboard settings, turn switches on or off, and adjust headrests. My car's traction control switch would sometimes turn off while I was driving, and the radio volume would change by itself. One of our vehicles, which I had waxed to a pristine shine, was suddenly covered in long scratches days later. The fireplace became another focal point for its harassment. After I cleaned out the leftover soot one day, the entity began bombarding us with the smell of chimney soot, amplifying it to an unbearable degree. I would walk into the house after work, and the smell would hit me like a wall. Praying to God and St. Michael sometimes helped, but the entity persisted, making the smell come and go as I prayed. Eventually, I placed a framed copy of the Lord's Prayer and a crucifix in the fireplace, which finally stopped the soot attacks. It wasn't just smells and disturbances, it targeted our health and well-being too. The basement, believed to have a portal according to psychics, had a large room that made certain people dizzy or nauseous. Our master bedroom, formerly the old woman's bedroom, remained the entity's favorite spot. The air in that room was heavy, warm, and foul-smelling, like sulfur, rotten eggs, or decaying flesh. The physical attacks continued. We woke up with scratches and bruises on our bodies countless times. Once, I had 3 dark bruises above my navel, perfectly arranged in a triangle. Our bed vibrated frequently at night, and it even pushed up from underneath us while we were sleeping. My wife felt the entity pressing into her back at work several times. The headboard and footboard of our beautiful new king-size bed, made of metal artwork, became scratched by what we believe were the hind claws of a 4-legged creature we had tracked in baby powder. The scratches matched the claw prints exactly. Despite all of this, we stayed. Why? Because through constant prayer and faith in God, we have weakened the entity. While it still lingers, its power has diminished. The scratches, bruises, and physical attacks have mostly stopped, and the disruptive noises and smells are less frequent. God's protection has been our saving grace, giving us the strength to live here day by day. Still, we wonder why this is happening to us. The old woman who lived here before denounced God after her traumatic experiences in the Holocaust, and we believe this opened a portal that allowed the demon to reside here. Psychics have told us the entity feeds on negativity and uses fear and chaos to grow stronger. By refusing to give in to fear and remaining calm, we've slowly taken back control. Even though the entity is weaker, it hasn't left entirely. We don't know if it ever will. Selling the house is a consideration, but disclosing the activity could make it impossible to sell. For now, we take things one day at a time, praying for protection and hoping for an end to this nightmare. I used to be a skeptic about the paranormal, but this experience has changed my perspective forever. This is our reality, a living nightmare. Believe what you will, but I know what we've been through, and it's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. In the spring of last year, my fiancé and I traveled with his mother from California to Illinois to watch her sister graduate. The drive was long, and our stay in Illinois was brief. On the way back, we decided to take our time, making a few stops to explore states we had rushed through on the way out. A storm hit just as we left Illinois and followed us into Missouri. By the time we passed Joplin, we were exhausted, so we decided to stop for the night at the USA Inn in Mount Vernon. I don't remember the exact room number, but our room faced a gas station, and we parked right outside the door. My fiancé and I had one room, and his mom was 2 doors down. Oddly, the room between us was unoccupied but left partially open. As we walked by it, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease that I couldn't explain. Things began to feel strange as soon as we stepped into our room. When we first arrived, we were starving, so we ordered pizza from a place recommended by the front desk. But by the time it arrived, none of us felt like eating. We each forced down only a slice or two from the 2 pizzas we had ordered. My fiancé's mom, who had all the lights and TV on in her room, mentioned feeling unsafe and uneasy. She couldn't explain it, but her discomfort mirrored my growing sense of dread. I believe in spirits, but my fiancé is a skeptic, so what happened that night shook us both. Around 9 p.m., we returned to our room. Not long after, my fiancé and I had an argument unlike any we'd ever had before. We're a loving couple and rarely fight, but this argument was vicious and inexplicable. We yelled, said spiteful things, and I even told him I wanted to hit him. A thought that shocked me as soon as it left my mouth. I paused to assess the situation and realized something was deeply wrong. There was no reason for us to be fighting like this. My fiancé admitted he felt the same. An irrational anger seemed to be consuming him, as if something was fueling the fight. Afterward, we both felt drained, like the argument had sapped all our energy. The negative energy in the room became impossible to ignore. We looked around, trying to shake the feeling. The room seemed ordinary, with a TV on a dresser and a large mirror facing the bed. But the bathroom gave us both chills. The shower, built into an alcove without a curtain or door, felt particularly oppressive. I had the eerie sensation that something was lurking there, waiting for me to be alone. We decided to go to bed, assuming exhaustion was to blame for everything. My fiancé quickly fell asleep, but I stayed awake, too nervous to relax. I read for hours, trying to distract myself, but the heavy, oppressive feeling lingered. Around 2 a.m., I heard my fiancé gasping for air. I looked over and saw that he was still asleep, but he seemed to be struggling to breathe, as if something were choking him. Panicked, I shook him and called his name until he woke up. He told me he'd been having a dream where he couldn't wake up, but he didn't want to tell me more, afraid of scaring me further. After that, I stayed awake, watching over him, but I couldn't shake the fear. As I lay there in the dark, I heard a light tapping noise. I closed my eyes and repeated to myself, "Nothing is there. Nothing is there." In response, I heard a loud bang on the wall, coming from the unoccupied room next door. A moment of silence passed before another bang, followed by the sound of something dragging across the floor. I froze, paralyzed by fear. When I finally turned to look at my fiancé, he wasn't there. I was alone in the room. The TV was on, but something was wrong. The newscaster's mouth stopped moving, though her voice continued. She seemed to be staring at me with a hateful expression, as if she could see me. I felt drawn to the mirror facing the bed. My reflection stared back at me, but when I moved to go to the bathroom, it didn't move with me. It just stood there, watching me with the same hateful glare. Then I heard banging on the bathroom door, like something with claws was throwing itself against it. The scraping sound of claws on the floor filled the room. I knew that whatever was behind the door would bring disaster if it got out. I shoved a chair against the door and ran for the exit, but when I opened it, there was nothing but pitch blackness outside. The door slammed shut, locking me inside. Feeling defeated, I returned to the bed and lay down, closing my eyes and shouting, "Stop!" When I opened my eyes again, my fiancé was asleep beside me. Confused and disoriented, I woke him up, barely able to speak through my panic. He assured me he hadn't left the bed and was visibly shaken by what I told him. Then he admitted that his nightmare had been almost identical to what I experienced. In his dream, he could see his mom and me through the window, but it was like a one-way mirror. We couldn't see him and he was trapped. The next morning, his mom said she had barely slept and felt as though something was in her room with her all night. When I got home, I did some research and found an article about a murder that had happened at the hotel the year before. A construction foreman staying there had been attacked by a drunk coworker, who he then shot to death. The third man who witnessed it refused to talk about what happened. The article raised more questions than it answered, but it was clear that something violent had taken place there. I believe there's an evil force in that hotel, one that thrives on anger and fear. I think it influenced my fiancé and me to argue and caused the waking nightmare I experienced. It's possible that same force fed on the men staying there, leading to the tragic events described in the article. Whatever it is, I hope I never encounter it again. The spirits of children divide opinions. Some believe they are demons taking the form of innocent children. Others see them as lost souls, stuck in a state of limbo. There's also a group of people who think both perspectives could be true. Personally, I fall into that middle ground. I'd love to hear what you think about the children I've encountered. This story takes place in the same house as my previous one. The first experience I'll share happened before I encountered the shadow figure in the basement. I had just returned home from a visit to my grandma's house. It was late, around 9 or 10 p.m. I stayed up until about 1 a.m. before deciding it was time to get some rest. I left the hallway light on and kept my bedroom door halfway open, about 2 feet from the doorframe. From my bed, I had a clear view of the door and doorknob. I had barely closed my eyes when I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. When I opened my eyes, I was shocked by what I saw. Standing in the doorway was the spirit of a little girl. We startled each other. It wasn't a long stare down. As soon as I looked at her, I instinctively jumped up and exclaimed, "WHO!" It was my first time seeing a spirit, and I couldn't contain my reaction. The girl bolted out of the room like a sprinter at the starting gun. The hallway light illuminated her as she ran. She was about 4 feet tall, wearing what looked like a dress or nightgown, with long hair flowing down her back. She moved so quickly that her hair and clothes seemed to ripple in the air. Afterward, I went to the bathroom because I tasted blood. I had a nosebleed. Back then, my nose bled during my first few encounters with spirits, though that doesn't happen anymore. I managed to fall asleep an hour later. Fast forward a couple of weeks. I had to give up my room again, this time for my uncle. With other family members sleeping in the living room, I ended up on the floor of the sitting room. This room was one of those spaces nobody actually uses, a decorative room with furniture nobody sits on. I can still hear my mom's stern voice, "Don't sit on that furniture, and leave the pillows alone." That night, I was sound asleep on the floor when I suddenly woke up gasping for air. I shot upright, trying to catch my breath. Moments later, I heard 2 children giggling as they ran away. The same thing happened the following night. I wasn't scared. I could sense that these children were just playing around, showing affection in their own way. I often caught glimpses of childlike shapes, almost like heat-wave ripples, accompanied by faint white orbs. I'd feel small hands stroke my arm or hold my hand when it hung over the armrest of the couch. Sometimes, my ears would pop, a sensation I've come to associate with their presence. These experiences continued even after I moved to a new house. One particular encounter stands out. It was a couple of months after the previous events, and I had given up my bedroom again. This time, with fewer family members visiting, I slept on the couch in the living room. I woke up to the sensation of pressure on my chest, followed by the sound of little feet smacking against the wooden floor. A girl giggled as she ran away. I let out a small "ah" in surprise, still feeling the distinct impression of her having jumped on and off my chest. Shaking my head, I went back to sleep. I don't believe these children are evil. To me, they feel like lost souls, clinging to me for comfort or connection. I've told them to move on, to go toward the light, but they seem attached to me. While I don't fully understand why they're here, I've accepted their presence for now. My friends and I have always been fascinated by the paranormal. Recently, we decided to try our hand at ghost hunting around town after I got a new digital recorder. The idea was simple, if a bit naive. We wanted to see if we could capture EVPs like the ones we'd seen on ghost hunting shows. It might sound like silly reasoning, but we were curious, and it seemed like a fun adventure. However, I didn't expect to end up as the one who would establish a peculiar connection with one of the entities we tried to contact. For my first story here, I've decided to share my most recent experiences with what I can only describe as my new spectral acquaintance. It all started in January when my friend Khalil and I decided to record EV Peace at a marker stone in the town square of Ozark. This marker is located near the spot where 3 members of a Civil War vigilante group known as the Balknabbers were executed for murder. A 4th man escaped the jail before he could face the same fate. Not knowing exactly what we were doing, Khalil and I began casually talking to the recorder, hoping for some kind of response. It was a cold night, and after some time of getting no obvious results, we decided to call it quits. Back in the car, Khalil fiddled with the recorder, trying to play back the recording. As he worked, I happened to glance back at the marker stone. That's when I saw him. Leaning against the stone was the silhouette of a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat. I shook Khalil and told him to look, but he brushed me off, focused on the recorder. I turned back to the stone, and the man was still there. This time he waved. Without thinking, I waved back. Once more, I urged Khalil to look, saying, "There's a guy there." "What guy?" he asked, looking up. I turned to point, but the man was gone. Fast forward to a rainy day in March. I was at home, sitting at my computer, when my dog let me know she needed to go out. I told my friends online I'd be back after a quick walk around the block. As I reached for the door, something strange happened. I experienced what I can only describe as a vision or something like it. In this vision, I was holding the recorder and looking at its screen. I heard myself ask, "What's your name?" Then, clear as day, I heard the response, "Billy." Just like that, I was back in the present, my hand on the doorknob. The recorder hadn't even been touched. It had been sitting on the coffee table untouched since January. I wasn't scared, just confused. Shaking it off, I took my dog out and started back home. As I reached the driveway, I experienced another strange sensation. This time, it wasn't quite a vision. It felt more like moving through water, a muffled, dreamlike state. I walked up the drive, stopping at the walkway leading to the front step. There, standing before me, was a man dressed in old-fashioned clothes. A rough white button-up shirt, dark pants, and a wide-brimmed hat. His features were indistinct, but I could feel his presence as if he were solid. He stepped closer and spoke, his voice clear despite the rain pouring down. "Don't you have a hat of your own inside?" he asked, smiling. Then, he took off his hat and placed it on my head. Even though I was soaked from head to toe, my hair, jeans, and jacket dripping with rain. The moment he placed the hat on me, I stopped feeling the rain on my head. I knew I should have still been getting wet, but somehow I wasn't. The vision-like feeling ended as abruptly as it started, leaving me standing in the rain. I hurried inside, eager to process what had just happened. I jumped back on the computer to tell my friends and did some quick research on the Balknabbers. Sure enough, one of the men hanged near the marker stone had been named Billy. Since then, I've wondered about the connection. Did I somehow reach him during that first EVP session? Is he lingering, trying to communicate more? I don't have all the answers, but I'm both intrigued and unsettled by this spectral friend. On Friday, May 18th, one of my best friends, Paige, had her sweet 16 at her house. She invited several friends, including me, to celebrate. We did the usual teenager stuff, playing games like Red Rover and hide and seek in the dark, complete with a fog machine that one of our friends had brought. It was all harmless fun. Around 10 p.m., a few friends left, leaving Paige, her 12-year-old sister Kirsten, our friends Erica and Bethany, and me. We gathered in the basement to figure out how to spend the rest of the night. I mentioned that I'd brought my Ouija board, as Paige had requested. While Paige didn't believe it would work, Bethany and I were more open to the idea. Erica, however, wasn't thrilled. She immediately dragged Kirsten upstairs, warning Paige that she'd tell on her if we went through with it. But Paige brushed it off and decided we should proceed anyway. The basement had 2 couches, one against the wall and the other near an air hockey table, vanity, and desk with a computer. In front of the second couch was a coffee table where we set up the board. I placed the board on the table and lit 3 candles, white, green, and pink. Their flames burned brightly at first. This detail will matter later. The planchette sat in the center as Paige and I took our places on the couch. Bethany sat cross-legged on the floor across from us, near the TV. After turning off the lights, I asked the first question. Is anyone here who would like to communicate with us? We waited. The planchette didn't move. Paige and I made lighthearted jokes, partly to calm our nerves, about how our shaky hands were probably causing tiny movements. After 2 tries with no response, we said goodbye and started talking. As we chatted, I admitted I felt a strange presence behind the couch. Bethany nodded silently in agreement, though Paige only smiled, seemingly unfazed. We decided to try again. This time, the atmosphere shifted. Once again, I asked, "Is anyone here?" We waited. The room felt heavier. Bethany suddenly shivered and asked if we felt a chill. Almost immediately, a cold sensation swept over my arms and legs. Bethany pointed out that the candle flames were flickering wildly, as if caught in a breeze, despite the stillness of the basement. It was unnerving, but we pressed on. Bethany wanted a turn with the board, so we switched spots. I became the scribe while she took over asking questions. After a few more unanswered attempts, we noticed something strange. The white candle's flame had shrunk to a faint, blue flicker, almost extinguished. Paige replaced it with a fresh white candle, but the unease lingered. Paige then decided to try. As she asked her questions, an unsettling reaction overtook me. Without warning, I began to laugh. At first, it was a quiet chuckle, but soon it escalated into uncontrollable, hysterical laughter. It didn't even sound like me, dark, manic, and utterly foreign. Paige, visibly unnerved, quickly said goodbye and turned on the lights. I tried to regain control as Paige ran upstairs to check on Erica and Kirsten. My laughter subsided, but I still giggled intermittently while packing up the board. My hands trembled, and I noticed my left hand was stiff. My fingers felt frozen together, and my thumb curled toward my palm. It took several moments before I could move it again. My arms, though not cold, tingled as if they'd fallen asleep. When Paige returned, we attempted to distract ourselves by watching a scary movie. However, her DVD player suddenly stopped working. After a few failed attempts to fix it, we resorted to watching TV, but the night's tension persisted. Bethany and I felt inexplicably drained. We wanted to sleep, but it felt like something was keeping us awake. We kept gravitating toward the back of the couch, near the air hockey table, where I'd felt that earlier presence. Periodically, we would burst into fits of hysterical laughter at nothing, or overreact to minor jokes. At one point, I was shaking so violently my teeth chattered, yet I wasn't cold. Strangely, Bethany and I were sweating, while the others complained about the basement being too cold. We didn't tell the others about what we were experiencing, not wanting to scare them. Instead, Bethany and I texted each other from across the room. She asked if I ever felt like someone was laughing with me when I laughed. I did. Finally, around 3 a.m., we managed to fall asleep. Bethany confessed she felt a heavy weight pressing her to the floor, forcing her into sleep. I struggled to keep my eyes closed, but eventually, I drifted off with the help of my MP3 player. Since that night, I've felt like someone is always watching me. It's not constant, but the feeling lingers, as if the presence is following me from afar. The Ouija board now sits hidden in my bookshelf, untouched. Yet, I occasionally catch myself laughing randomly at nothing or feeling a sudden, overwhelming urge to cry, as if mourning a loss I can't explain. Even now, while visiting my mother in a completely different state, I feel a presence looming behind me. It's as if something hasn't let go. In 1969, when I was 11 years old, my family lived what you'd call a normal life. There were 7 of us in total: Mom, Dad, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and me. We'd moved into an old 2-story farmhouse in Pettis County, north of Smithton, Missouri. The house had a lot of character, and at first it felt like home. We'd been living there for about 2 years when my 17-year-old brother came to me with something strange. One night, he said, something had woken him up. When he rolled over, he saw a shape standing in the doorway of his room. According to him, it had broad shoulders like a gorilla and stood about the same height. At first, I thought he was just trying to scare us. He was always the joker in the family. So, I brushed it off and said, "You're full of it." But then he surprised me by saying, "Why don't you sleep in my room for a week and see if you see it?" For some reason, I agreed. I don't know what I was thinking. I was 11, and like any kid, I sometimes got scared of the dark. But I felt safe in the house, so I decided to take him up on it. The first week passed uneventfully. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. My brother told me, "It's fine. You can stay here longer if you want." So I did. Then one summer morning, everything changed. At least I thought it was morning. I was jolted awake by a sharp, stinging sensation on my left foot, like someone had dragged a fingernail up the sole, as if striking a match. My eyes shot open, and I immediately looked toward my feet, but nothing was there. Confused, I sat up. The room was dimly lit, with just enough light to make me think dawn was breaking. I glanced at the window by the head of the bed beside me and then saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A short, stocky man ran toward the doorway. He wore a green short-sleeved shirt and blue overalls. At first glance, I thought it was Dad. He always wore overalls, and the way this figure moved was just like him. Half asleep, I called out jokingly, "Dad, get out of here and stop bothering us. We don't have school today." The figure turned the corner into the unfinished room next to us, a space we used for odds and ends. But instead of leaving, he paused. He leaned back into the doorway, his head peeking around the frame. He locked eyes with me, grinning mischievously. Then, he wiggled his fingers at me like he was waving to a child. At that moment, my brother stirred and asked groggily, "What's the matter?" I pointed to the doorway and said, "Oh, Dad's over there pestering us." My brother glanced at the door and, still half asleep, mumbled, "Yeah, Dad, let us go back to sleep." But when I looked back at the doorway, the man was gone. The hallway, which had seemed lit just moments ago, was now dark. I assumed Dad had gone into the spare room and shut the light off. Feeling uneasy but still tired, I shut my eyes and tried to fall back asleep. Yet something nagged at me. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no sound of him leaving. When I couldn't stand it anymore, I peeked again at the hallway. It was still dark and silent. I figured he must have gone downstairs to leave for work. I didn't give the incident much thought, until later that day when Dad came home. As soon as I saw him, I noticed he was wearing a completely different shirt. Curious, I asked, "What were you doing upstairs this morning? Pestering us?" Dad looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What?" he asked, confused. I repeated the question and he frowned. "I wasn't upstairs this morning," he said. "I haven't been upstairs for 3 months. My mom chimed in from the kitchen. "No, he wasn't," she confirmed. "He overslept this morning and didn't even have time for coffee before heading out." I just stood there, stunned. The man I'd seen, the one who'd grinned at me, waved, and looked so much like my father, wasn't him. To this day, I can still picture his face in my mind. The playful grin, the glassy eyes, the way he waved his fingers like he was teasing me. He looked so much like Dad that it was uncanny, but I know now it wasn't him. Who or what? It remains a mystery I'll never forget. Light's that dim, simple electrical wiring issue, right? That's a high possibility. It's pretty easy to debunk light bulbs that dim randomly. However, it's not so easy to explain the other activity that sometimes accompanies it. Unless, of course, you're the type of person who believes in listening and observing before rushing to conclusions. Between 2008 and 2010, I lived in a house where I experienced things that were hard to rationalize. The house wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either, built sometime in the 80s. It was a welcome upgrade from the one-bedroom apartment my family, parents and brother, and I had left behind. For the first few months, everything seemed normal. I loved the space and never gave the house's quirks much thought. That changed after I started noticing the lights. It began when I was brushing my teeth one evening. The bathroom light bulbs dimmed suddenly, then brightened. I shrugged it off as probably faulty wiring. But then it happened again in multiple rooms. I even started noticing lights behaving the same way outside of the house. at school, work, and even at family members' homes. That's when I began to think it might be something else entirely. There was more. After the lights dimmed and brightened, I'd feel strange temperature changes, cold and hot spots sweeping through the room. My ears would pop like they do when you're on a plane or have water stuck in them. Occasionally, I'd feel a sensation like fingers running through my hair, especially as I was trying to fall asleep. Something didn't feel right, but I tried not to let it get to me. At least not until the night in the basement. The basement was unfinished, concrete walls and floor, with some walls left as bare wooden frames. It had an eerie vibe I couldn't shake, and the laundry room was even worse. It had no door, just an open entryway, and the light bulb in there rarely lasted more than a couple of days. It often stayed dark. I hated going in there to grab clothes. Something about it felt off. One night, I was in the basement, playing music on the stereo. Only one light was on, directly above me, as the other bulb, about 10 yards away, was out. I was in my own world, rapping along to a song, when the light above me dimmed so much I thought it might explode. I ignored it at first, staying focused on the music, until I felt an overwhelming sensation that I was being watched. I glanced to my left, and froze. Standing in the laundry room doorway was a black shadow, about my height, 6 feet 2 inches, completely blocking the frame behind it. It wasn't like the shadows you see cast by light. This one was darker than the room itself. We locked eyes, or at least I felt like it was staring at me, though I couldn't see its eyes. For about 5 seconds, I just stood there, shocked but curious, staring back at it. Then, without warning, the shadow turned to its right and glided into the dark laundry room. It moved effortlessly, as if floating on air. I could see it even in the pitch black, a deeper darkness than the surrounding room. Seconds after it disappeared, I felt a warm trickle from my nose. My nose was bleeding. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or the sheer rush of what I'd just seen. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared. Instead, I caught myself thinking, gliding looks so much cooler than walking. I stayed in the basement, but this time I turned my chair to face the laundry room. At least I won't be blindsided again, I thought. It wasn't until later that I put everything together. The dimming lights, the strange sensations, the shadow figure. I had started by writing off the lights as bad electrical wiring. But after that encounter, I couldn't deny there was something more going on. Electrical wiring, debunked. When I was about 20 years old, I lived in a trailer in a tiny town in Missouri. It was summer, unbearably hot, and I had developed a nightly routine of getting up for a glass of water. My trailer had lots of windows, and Missouri nights can be bright under the moonlight, so I never turned on the lights. One night, as I sipped my water in the dim kitchen, I felt it. A strange, almost primal sensation that I was being watched. Trying to shake the unease, I finished my drink and walked toward the living room. The feeling didn't go away. Something pulled me toward the front door, about 3 feet to my left. Compelled, I peeked out through the small window in the door. There, standing about 10 feet away, was a figure cloaked in a hooded robe, its back turned to me. At first, I thought maybe someone's car had broken down, given that I lived on the outskirts of town. Against better judgment, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "Are you okay?" I called out. The figure turned, and in that instant, my blood ran cold. I'd heard the phrase before, but this was the first time I truly understood it. The figure was feminine, but she wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. Her entire body was a black abyss, a void of substance, as though she was made of the absence of light itself. Around her edges was a glowing white outline, like the negative of a black and white photograph. Her face didn't have any fixed features. It was constantly shifting, as if she were 1,000 faces all at once. Slowly, she began walking toward me, stopping about 4 feet away. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught between fear and fascination. My brain struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. She moved fluidly, deliberately, and then raised a hand to pull back her hood. Her hair, if you could call it that, was wild and curly but still made of that same shadowy, depthless void outlined in glowing white. I tried to focus on her face, but it was impossible. My eyes slid off her features, unable to hold on to any clear image. We stood there, staring at each other, locked in this surreal moment that felt like an eternity. Slowly, she lifted her hand, as though reaching out to touch my face. Panic surged through me, but instead of retreating, I instinctively raised my hand to meet hers. My thought was almost absurd in hindsight. If you're going to touch me, I'm going to touch you. She froze, pulling her hand back suddenly, faster than her earlier movements. Then she looked at my hand and then back at my face. Her face, or the shifting shadows that made up her face, seemed to twist into a smile. It wasn't the kind of smile you'd expect, but I felt the intention. She nodded, turned around, and began walking away. A few steps later, she simply dissolved into the night, vanishing as if she had never been there. I stood on the porch for a moment, processing what had just happened. The overwhelming dread I'd felt when she appeared had completely dissipated, replaced by an inexplicable sense of peace. Eventually, I went back inside, locked the door, and went to bed. It was just after 1 a.m. 6 years ago, my family moved into a new home. For the first 2 years, everything seemed normal. Then, during a conversation with my mom, she revealed her belief in spirits and spiritual warfare. This revelation piqued my curiosity, and I began researching the paranormal. Not long after, strange things started happening. One day, while home alone, I heard the blinds closing. I went to check, but no one was there, although the blinds were still moving. Moments later, the living room fan turned on by itself. Assuming it was just a glitch, I brushed it off. When I moved my room to the basement, my dad installed a fan with a remote switch. It worked fine at first, but one winter night, I woke freezing. The fan had switched on full blast. I turned it off and went back to sleep, only for it to happen again, this time with the light also turning on. My dad replaced the switch, but the problem persisted. I began to feel uneasy, especially as the fan seemed to act up only at night. Things escalated one night as I read ghost stories online. The fan turned on again, and my cat started howling at it, fixated on something I couldn't see. She left the room, staring at the ceiling, and I felt compelled to pray. As soon as I finished, the eerie tension lifted, but the unease lingered. Around this time, I started dreaming about a soldier named Jesse. I couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something. One day, I walked through the cemetery across the street and stumbled upon an old grave. The headstone bore the name Jesse and featured a black and white image of a soldier. I took a picture and sent it to my best friend, convinced I'd found the spirit tied to my experiences. Months later, the unease in my basement worsened. I moved to the downstairs living room, avoiding my room entirely. One night, I woke around 2 a.m. and saw a shadowy figure against the wall. He was tall, wearing what looked like a trench coat and a helmet. By the time I focused, he was gone. I described the figure to my fiancée, who confirmed it matched World War II-era attire. Deciding to honor Jesse, I went back to the cemetery to place flowers on his grave for Memorial Day. Strangely, the grave was gone. I walked the entire cemetery twice, reading every headstone, but Jesse's was nowhere to be found. To this day, I wonder, did he show me that grave as a message? Was it a fabrication to prove his presence? I still feel him watching over me, but his disappearance leaves me questioning what truly happened. This happened some time ago, but the events of that night remain vivid in my mind. My fiancé James, our friend Ed, and I were out joyriding late one evening. It was probably close to midnight and we were starting to get bored. James spoke up, asking, "Well, what do you guys want to do?" I was tired and just wanted to go home, but Ed had other plans. He suggested, "Why don't we take her to that house off Highway 36? Confused, I asked, "What house?" James simply said, "You'll see," and started driving in that direction. We pulled up to a massive, rundown 2-story house. The moment I saw it, unease washed over me, and I even felt slightly nauseated. The house had no paint, the doors were missing, and the windows were shattered. Off to the right was a collapsing barn, and in the front yard stood a few trees. one of which was particularly large and foreboding. In the backyard, I noticed an old cellar, and near the front yard was what appeared to be a crumbling well. I asked James about the story behind the house. He explained that back in the 1900s, a family lived there, a husband, wife, and their children. Then he told me the chilling part. Mercury somehow got into their well water, causing the family to go insane. The man killed all his children with an axe, hung his wife from that big tree in the yard, and then shot himself. He assured me that this story was real. It had been documented in the local newspaper archives. Despite the gruesome tale, I wasn't sure why they had brought me there. That's when our truck suddenly died. At first, it didn't scare me. Vehicles sometimes do that when idling too long. As I scanned the yard, my eyes locked onto something near the backyard, and I froze. I saw a massive dog. I know it was a dog because I could see the light reflecting off its eyes as it turned its head and the pink of its tongue as it panted. Its ribcage moved visibly with each breath. But this was no ordinary dog. It was enormous, far larger than any breed I've ever known. Speechless, I pointed at it, unable to say a word. The guys noticed my reaction and turned to look, but before they could say much, the truck died again and refused to start. Then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed movement inside the house. The guys saw it too and followed my gaze. There was someone or something walking through the house. What was odd was how it seemed to teleport between floors. One moment it was visible in an upstairs window, and the next it was downstairs. By now I was terrified. My chest felt heavy, like something was pressing on it, and I started struggling to breathe. As I scanned the yard again, I saw another figure walking. The guys saw it too, but this wasn't a normal person. At times it appeared solid, and other times you could almost see through it. James was frantically trying to start the truck, and when it finally roared to life, we sped out of the driveway and headed home. While they wouldn't admit it, I could tell both James and Ed were just as scared as I was. When we got home, I went to run a bath to calm myself. Looking in the mirror, I was horrified to see a massive handprint on my chest. I called James to see if I was imagining things, but he confirmed it was real. That's when it hit me. Whatever had been at that house had pressed on my chest so hard that it left a visible mark. I don't know how to explain everything I saw that night. Some parts seemed like they could have been our imagination, but the handprint? That was very real. I still plan to find that newspaper article to confirm the story and share it. But to this day, I can't shake what we experienced that night. When I was about 14, my friend Kaylee and I stayed at our friend Kylie's house in the countryside. Near her house, there was an old, abandoned home that we wanted to explore. It was nighttime, and Kaylee was too scared to go with us, so she stayed behind while Kylie and I grabbed a flashlight and made our way out. The walk was long and dark, with only one flashlight to guide us. When we arrived, the house looked like something out of a horror movie. Run down, with toys scattered all over the yard, a beat-up car, and an old shed. We decided to try the front door, and to our surprise, it opened. Inside, the first room we entered was a kitchen with a staircase to the right. The kitchen walls had holes in them, and reddish-brown splatters covered the walls and refrigerator. We weren't sure what it was, but it gave us the creeps. Curious, we opened the fridge, and the same reddish-brown substance was smeared inside. At that point, we were too freaked out to continue and ran back to Kylie's house as fast as we could. When we got back, we told Kaylee everything, and together we decided to return to the house during daylight to check out the upstairs. For the rest of the night, we tried to sleep. Kaylee and Kylie shared the twin bed, and I laid down on the floor. I had trouble falling asleep and was lying with my back to my friends when I suddenly felt my blanket moving near my feet. Thinking it was Kylie's cat, I sat up, but the cat wasn't in the room. I asked my friends if they had touched my blanket, but they laughed and said no. Not believing them, I laid down on my back this time, keeping my eyes open to catch them if they tried again. Moments later, the blanket was yanked strongly, pulling my foot down to the floor. My toes were forced against the ground. I screamed and jumped up onto the bed with them, turning the lights on. I knew they couldn't have done it because I had been watching them the whole time. Still, they didn't believe me. Frustrated, I sat on the bed, wide awake, while they slept with the lights on. The next day, we returned to the house, and it was even stranger in the daylight. In the yard, we saw a large circle of stones surrounding a dirt mound with a cross sticking out of it. Nearby, there was a tire swing swaying back and forth, even though there wasn't any wind. The leaves on the trees weren't moving at all. Inside the house, we showed Kaylee the reddish-brown splatters, but she still wasn't convinced. We were too scared to go upstairs, so we went back outside. As I stepped off the porch, I thought I was stepping onto a broken piece of wood, but when I looked down, it was a headstone. I have no idea why there was a headstone by the porch, but when Kaylee saw it, she started to believe something was off. Kylie and I decided to check out the shed while Kaylee stayed behind. Inside, we found strange drawings and markings covering the walls. They were glowing in the dark, which made the place even creepier. Fear began to take over, and I bolted back toward the house, with my friends close behind me. To this day, I wonder if something followed Kylie and me back from the house that first night and was messing with my blanket. I know what I felt wasn't a dream, and no one else could have done it. Terrified me. My friends still don't believe me, but I know it happened. Have any of you experienced something like this, only to have no one believe you? Girls and sleepovers, what could be a better combination? Especially when it's just you and your best friend, acting like sisters. That night, I was staying over at my friend Angela's house. We spent the evening pulling pranks on her mom, while her dad got us back with his own tricks. Being suckers for scary movies, we decided to watch The Grudge 2, at nearly 1 a.m. no less. Angela made me sit by the window, joking that if something tried to come in, it would get me first. Lucky me. We were just getting to the part where someone was about to die when, her dad jumped out of the closet, scaring us half to death. I screamed louder than I ever had in my life. He laughed so hard, and even as we tried to act like we had known he was there, we couldn't stop shaking. Yeah, sure, Dad. We totally knew you were there. We lied through gritted teeth, trying to save face. He laughed all the way down the hall, and eventually we started the movie again, finishing it in terrified silence. Let's watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre next, Angela suggested. Sure, why not? I said, though I was already regretting it. Watching it was a mistake. We were scared out of our skins and convinced we'd never be able to sleep. Later that night, as we lay in bed, me, of course, by the window, we were startled awake by the sound of a chainsaw. We screamed so loud we probably woke the neighbors. Laughing in the doorway was Angela's dad, holding an actual chainsaw. He was enjoying himself way too much. He laughed until tears streamed down his face, then left the room. Oh, you shouldn't have done that, her mom said from the hallway, scolding him. Well, I did, he replied, firing up the chainsaw again. The neighbors are going to have a fit if you keep this up, she warned him. Let them. It'll give them a show, he said, grinning. Her mom came in, apologizing for Angela's dad, but we said it was fine, while secretly plotting our revenge. We came up with the perfect plan. We'd play The Ring in their room, starting at the scene where Samara climbs out of the well, and hide under their bed to freak them out. It was foolproof, until we realized the DVD wasn't in Angela's room. It was in the living room. The living room was down the hall from her parents' room, and their door was always open. We had to be stealthy. Slowly, we crept into the living room. Angela grabbed the DVD, and I slipped under the bed in her parents' room, waiting. Angela quickly set the scene, pausing the movie at just the right moment, and joined me under the bed with the remotes. She pressed play, but nothing happened. Thinking she hadn't pushed hard enough, she tried again. Still nothing. When she tried a third time, the TV turned off completely. I think we hit the power button, Angela whispered. But when she turned it back on, it shut off again. Do they have another remote? I asked. No. I've got them all, she replied, showing me every remote. Suddenly, Angela gasped and hit my arm. I followed her gaze to the window. Someone was staring in at us. Angela, we're on the second floor, I said, barely able to breathe. She didn't respond. How could someone be up there, glaring in at us? We froze, terrified, watching as they watched us. Then, out of nowhere, the TV blared to life, playing the exact scene we had queued up. Her parents jumped out of bed, scrambling to turn it off, but nothing worked. Finally, her dad unplugged the TV and started looking for the remotes. That's when he found us. "Come out," he said, shaking his head. We crawled out from under the bed, explaining the prank and the figure we'd seen outside. Her dad brushed it off, saying there was no way anyone could be outside that window. "It's too high up, and it's too dark for anyone to see you," he said firmly. "But we know what we saw. So what do you think? Was it fake, or was it real?" I live in a large fraternity house on our school's campus, and next to it is a concrete walkway that connects the school's apartments and dorms to the university buildings. It's nothing remarkable, just a well-used path where students constantly pass by. About 75 yards uphill from our house, this walkway forks into another short path that leads to a gas station. During the opening week of school this year, I was walking up the hill to the gas station. As I reached the top, something caught my eye: 3 people walking on the concrete walkway. But when I turned to look directly at them, they weren't there. You know that feeling when you're almost certain you saw something in your peripheral vision, but when you look, it's just gone. This was something different. The people I thought I saw appeared in flashes, like brief bursts of light, almost like a strobe light illuminating a dark room for just a split second. Each flash revealed them in stark black and white, and between flashes they moved to different positions along the walkway. There were 3 of them. 2 were walking together toward the dorms to my right. A girl and a guy who had their arms linked, the way people sometimes did back in the 40s. The guy was wearing a leather jacket, and while I couldn't clearly make out the girl, I had the impression of her being petite. The third person, a girl with long, flowing curly hair, was walking in the opposite direction toward campus. Her hair seemed to blow in the wind, even though there wasn't any breeze. In the first 2 flashes, the couple and the single girl were walking in opposite directions, but in the third flash, the single girl had stopped and turned around. She was staring at the couple, and the expression on her face was unforgettable. It looked like heartbreak. I had the distinct feeling that the guy had left her for the girl he was now walking with, and the pain on her face was unmistakable. That alone was strange enough, but what happened next made it even weirder. My buddy, Alex Hopkins, later told me he had seen the exact same thing. The eerie part? We weren't in the same place, and it wasn't even at the same time. Yet he described the same figures in the same area, appearing in those same strobe-like flashes. When I shared my experience, he looked at me and said, "I wish you didn't say that, because I saw the exact same thing." He then went on to describe what he had seen. While some of the minor details didn't match up, for instance, we disagreed on the direction the couple was walking. Most of it was eerily identical. I distinctly remembered the single girl having blonde hair, but Alex insisted that everything he saw was in black and white. Still, the key details we both agreed on gave me chills. The number of people, the way they moved between the flashes, their attire that seemed from another era, and the heartbroken expression on the single girl's face. It's funny how we sometimes question what we've seen, brushing it off as a trick of the mind. But when someone else recounts the same experience, it hits differently. It makes you wonder, was it just an illusion, or something more? I don't usually talk about the strange things I see, but this one stuck with me. Knowing Alex saw it too makes it harder to dismiss. I've been fascinated by paranormal activity since my early teens, diving into countless books about ghosts, entities, and apparitions. As a child, I saw ghosts, which sparked my curiosity and led me down this path of research. Though I've always had a connection to the paranormal, it had been years since I'd last experienced anything unusual, until this incident. I was 16 at the time, and my boyfriend, Dan, lived in St. Louis County. There was a part of his neighborhood called LeMay, a small, close-knit community where everyone knew each other. Unlike most of the county's newer, modern homes, LeMay had an old, almost forgotten feel to it. The houses were aged, some barely standing, and families had lived there for generations. It was midsummer, and we'd spent the day swimming at a local pool. Around 10 p.m., we were driving back to Dan's house. I was in the passenger seat, and as we approached LeMay, a strange urge made me look out at the houses. Dan was focused on driving, and the car was quiet, but my eyes lingered on the passing homes. That's when I saw it. On the left side of the road stood an old red brick house, its white trim and gutters peeling, with a screened porch that wrapped around it, barely holding together. The lawn was overgrown, with weeds climbing toward the sky, and in the center of the yard was a massive tree. It had thick, gnarled branches that reached out like skeletal arms. But what froze me in my seat, what made my heart pound and my breath hitch, were the three figures hanging from the tree. They swung gently, suspended by their necks. A man, a woman, and a child. They looked like a family. Dirt streaked their faces, and their clothing was unmistakably from the 1700s. I couldn't contain myself. I screamed, curling into a ball and pressing myself into the corner of my seat. Dan slammed on the brakes, his voice full of panic. "Oh my God! Jasmine, what's wrong?" All I could manage to say was, "Keep going," my voice trembling. The rest of the ride was silent. I was in shock, replaying the sight of that family over and over in my head. When we finally got to his house, I explained what I had seen. Dan believed me immediately. My reaction in the car left no doubt in his mind. Still, he insisted that the house I described didn't have a tree in front of it. He passed by it every day and promised to prove it to me in the morning. The next day, around 6 a.m., we drove back to the house. As we approached, I braced myself for what I might see. To my shock, the tree was gone. In its place was an old stump, weathered and decayed, as if the tree had been cut down years ago. The lawn wasn't nearly as overgrown as it had been the night before, and everything looked strangely normal, except for the figure watching us from the screened porch. An old man stood behind the screen, staring at us. His expression was blank, but his presence sent a chill through me. Dan and I quickly walked back to the car and drove away without a word. Dan knew I wasn't one to exaggerate or make things up, and after that experience, he believed me completely. I've read enough about spirits to understand that they exist, and I've come to terms with the idea that we share this earth with them. I don't feel the need to investigate what I saw that night. I just hope that family has found peace. Even though I've grown used to these experiences over the years, they still manage to scare me when they happen. It's a humbling reminder of the mysteries we can't always explain. This story takes place in St. Louis, Missouri, back in 1996. I was 8 years old at the time, though I don't remember much about what led up to that night. I don't recall what I had done that day or why my mother and I ended up staying overnight at my grandmother's house. My grandmother's house was a shotgun-style home. The living room, dining room, and master bedroom were all connected in a straight line. From the living room, you could look through to the dining room and see the doorway to the master bedroom. That night, my mother and grandmother were sleeping on the floor in the living room while I was trying to fall asleep on the couch. I was lying on my side, facing the dining room. As I opened my eyes, something caught my attention in the dining room, near the threshold of my grandmother's bedroom. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a white figure. I froze in fear but couldn't look away. My mother had told me ghost stories from her childhood, so I knew enough to think this might be a ghost. The figure appeared to be a woman. I could make out her hourglass shape, but her whole body glowed a bright, almost fluorescent white. At first, she stood still, but then she started moving in place, waving her hands as though beckoning me to come closer. Terrified, I kept staring, unable to even blink. Then, the figure began to move as if she were dancing, her motion slow and deliberate, like she was in slow motion. I couldn't see her face or make out any details of her clothing, just her glowing white figure. I wanted to call out to my mother, but I was too afraid to move. I didn't want the ghost to know I could see her. Instead, I pulled the blanket over my face and stayed like that until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I told my mother and grandmother what I had seen. They brushed it off, saying it was just my imagination. Years later, I brought the story up to my grandmother again, and this time she admitted she believed me. She explained that she hadn't wanted to scare me when I was younger. She then confessed that she had seen the ghost herself on multiple occasions, and that it often moved things around in the house. I also learned that during the time I saw the ghost, my younger brother was just a few weeks old. My family would wrap him up tightly in a blanket, like a burrito, and lay him on my grandmother's bed while they slept in the living room. More than once, they woke up to his cries and found him lying on the floor in the bedroom doorway, unwrapped, freezing cold. There was no explanation for how this happened. My brother was only 2 weeks old and couldn't have moved himself. No one else was in the house, yet it happened more than once. Eventually, my grandmother moved to a new house down the street. After she left, my cousin and his family moved into the old house. To this day, they claim a woman haunts the home. This story takes place in St. Louis, Missouri, my hometown. While I still live in St. Louis, I no longer reside in the house where I grew up. My parents still live there, and they claim the house hasn't been haunted since it was blessed. But from what I remember, it was definitely haunted. One incident in particular stands out vividly in my mind. It happened when I was about 13 years old. At the time, I shared a small room with my younger brother, Carlos, who was 10. That day, my mother, a janitor at an elementary school, had brought home a large bucket of crayons. Carlos and I spent hours in our room, coloring and goofing around. Around 9 p.m., my father told us it was time for bed. Carlos had the bottom bunk, and I slept on the top. Not ready to sleep, I grabbed a handful of crayons, climbed to my bunk, and started tossing them at Carlos. Laughing, he threw some back at me. We were being loud and rowdy until our father stormed into the room. "What the heck are you kids doing? Clean up these crayons and get your yes to bed now." Terrified of our father, we scrambled to clean up, throwing all the crayons back into the bucket. Too scared to sleep in our own bunks after getting yelled at, Carlos and I both crammed onto the bottom bunk and quickly fell asleep. Sometime around midnight, Carlos woke me up. "Jasmine, I'm scared. Look out the door down the steps." Our bedroom door faced the staircase that led down to the lobby area. Groggy and confused, I turned to look. The lobby light was flicking on and off in a steady pattern. The switch, one of those old, loud ones that made a distinct click, was moving up and down on its own. No one was there. I tried to reassure Carlos, telling him it was probably just a wiring issue. But deep down, I was terrified. Turning away from the steps, I forced myself to fall asleep. Later that night, Carlos woke me up again. "Jasmine, wake up. I'm scared." This time, our bedroom door was closed, and the room was pitch black. Carlos whispered, "Listen. It sounds like crayons hitting the walls." I held my breath and listened. Sure enough, it sounded exactly like crayons bouncing off the walls. Panicking, I reached for the flashlight we kept under the bed, turned it on, and scanned the room. Nothing. There were no crayons flying, no markings, nothing that could explain the sound. Yet it continued. We were too afraid to move, so eventually, we fell asleep despite the persistent noise. When we woke up the next morning, we were shocked to find crayons scattered all over the floor. The bucket was completely empty, and the walls were dotted with tiny crayon markings, exactly as if someone had thrown them. Terrified, we cleaned everything up and threw the crayons away. When we told the rest of the family what had happened, no one believed us. Being the youngest, Carlos and I were dismissed as immature and accused of making up the story. Years later, I brought the incident up again with my older siblings. By then, they believed me, mainly because I had never wavered in my story, even after so many years. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. First, I want to say this is a very emotional and personal story for me. It's about my cousin and best friend, Neo, and the moments when I felt his presence after his death. Neo was murdered on June 25, 2006. He was beaten to death with a hammer by someone he thought was a friend. His friend, who was under the influence of crack, became enraged during a fight over an Xbox. This so-called friend had stolen the Xbox from Neo's house, and when Neo went to confront him, the situation escalated to a horrifying end. There were other reasons for the tension between them, but they feel irrelevant compared to the pain of losing someone I loved so much. Even now, it's hard to write about this. I miss him deeply, and I hope he knows how much he meant to me. When the funeral came, I didn't know if I could go. I wanted to remember Neo as he was full of life, always dancing, singing, and making everyone laugh. I didn't want my last memory of him to be in a casket. But my faith told me I needed to pay my respects, even though it felt unbearable. Walking into the funeral home, I felt my heart shattering. As soon as I stepped through the double doors and saw the casket from a distance, my knees gave out, and I found myself on the floor. My father lifted me up and helped me to a pew. For the next 30 minutes, I sat there, trying to summon the courage to say goodbye. When I finally approached the casket, I couldn't hold it together. I cried out, "That's not Neo." My father rushed to hold me as I sobbed. "That's not him, Dad. He's cold, hard, and doesn't even look like himself." Despite my resistance, I leaned in and kissed his hand. In prayer, I asked him not to leave me, to visit me in my dreams, and to watch over my child. A week later, I made Rest in Peace t-shirts for my family. On my way to pick them up, something strange happened. Alone in the car, I heard a song start playing. One from a CD I didn't remember putting in. Even more unusual, it started on track 12, a song about losing a loved one. The CD player couldn't just skip to that track on its own. As I listened and sang along, I started to cry. Suddenly, I felt goosebumps on my right arm, the one resting on the armrest. The hairs on my arm stood straight up, and then I felt it, someone caressing my arm. Startled, I looked at the passenger seat, expecting to see someone there, but it was empty. Through tears and laughter, I said aloud, "Neo, I know you're here with me. I miss you so much, and thank you for visiting me." When I told my family about it, many were moved to tears and said they were happy for me. A few days later, my brother Salvador and a friend went to the house where Neo was killed. What they saw haunted them. Walls stained with blood, puddles of it still on the kitchen floor, and handprints where Neo had tried to crawl away. The most horrifying part? They found pieces of his brain on the floor. My brother and his friend lit candles in the room and said a prayer. 2 weeks later, I went to the house with close friends to pray for Neo, hoping to help him find peace. I stayed in the car while my friends went inside. They returned pale and shaken. My friend Danny warned me, "Jasmine, don't ever go in there. You don't want to see it." When I asked about the flickering lights in the window, he explained that the candles Salvador had lit weeks ago were still burning. In the months that followed, I started having recurring dreams of Neo. Each night, I'd see him sitting in the chair at my computer desk, watching me sleep. He never spoke, just looked at me with a gentle smile and soft eyes. When I woke, the dreams felt so real that I half expected to see him still sitting there. 2 years later, Neo's mother reached out to my mom with an urgent message. She had dreamt of him looking worried and repeatedly saying my name. At the time, I was struggling with depression and even contemplating ending my life. Hearing this was a wake-up call. Felt like Neo was trying to protect me. Around the same time, I noticed something unusual with my daughter. She was only a month old when Neo died and had never known him. One day, while I was crying in my bedroom over financial struggles, my 2-year-old walked in and asked, "Mommy, are you crying?" I denied it, but what she said next stopped me in my tracks. Neo said, "Don't cry." Stunned, I asked her, "Baby, who is Neo?" She replied, "I don't know." To this day, I believe Neo was watching over us, not as a ghost, but as an angel. Knowing he might be looking out for my daughter and me brings me comfort, even though I miss him more than words can express. Towards the end of summer in 2009, I started experiencing something I can only describe as deeply disturbing dreams. My family dismissed them as nightmares, laughing them off, but I knew better. These weren't just nightmares. I was fully conscious when they occurred. I live in a small town in Missouri, and my family is religious. I've never been involved in anything occult, never touched a Ouija board, and never dabbled in anything remotely connected to spirits or demons. There's no reason why something like this should happen to me. I'm just your average small-town teenager. The episodes always started the same way. I'd wake up feeling a presence in my room. I'd be unable to move or speak, my body frozen, but my eyes were wide open, and I could see everything. Something heavy would press down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. My jaw would feel locked, as if it were wired shut. Waves of panic would wash over me, and I wish I could put into words how terrifying it was. Shivers ran up and down my spine, and fear kept my eyes open, even in my paralyzed state. But I wasn't alone. Every time, there was a shrouded figure in my room. Sometimes it stood in the corner, watching me. Other times, it hovered over me, or worse, floated just above me, its face inches from mine. It was always a shadowy figure, cloaked in darkness, its form pulsating like black mist. I instinctively knew it was a demon. Nothing else could radiate such an intense, evil presence. The encounters started happening every 2 weeks but quickly escalated to 2 or 3 times a week. Each time was worse than the last. The most terrifying encounter happened toward the end of August, just before my sophomore year started. I woke up to the now familiar feeling of being paralyzed. A crushing pressure pinned me to the bed, making it nearly impossible to breathe. I could sense the demon's presence immediately. It hovered over me, its face only inches from mine. I couldn't make out any features, just a swirling black form cloaked in shadows. I couldn't scream for my parents or brother, so I did the only thing I could think of. I started to pray. I repeated Jesus' name over and over, begging for the terror to end. At first, I thought it might help, but then the demon's rage intensified. The panic I already felt grew even stronger. My arms were suddenly pinned above my head, as if by invisible hands. That wasn't the first time it had touched me, but what happened next was something I'll never forget. For the first and only time, the demon spoke to me. It growled in a voice unlike anything I'd ever heard. God can't help you now. The sound was horrifying. It wasn't like any earthly voice. It was a low, guttural whisper, deep and rough, but layered, like a man and a woman speaking at the same time. The man's voice was deep and gravelly, like someone who'd smoked for decades, while the woman's voice was high-pitched and cracked, as if she were in unbearable pain. Nothing on earth could sound like that. Gradually, the demon receded. The crushing weight lifted, and I could move again. As soon as I regained control, I bolted to my parents' room, crying and begging to sleep with them for the rest of the night. They were startled but did their best to calm me down. Even now, I still get visits from time to time. They don't happen as often as they used to, and I'm not as scared as I was back then, but the experiences remain incredibly unsettling. I know it was real. It wasn't some sleep disorder, and it wasn't my subconscious mind playing tricks on me. I hate when people try to dismiss it that way because I know what I saw and felt. It was real, so real I swear to God. I just hope it never happens again. When I was 22, I lived with my mom in Fulton, Missouri, for about a year while I was getting back on my feet. During that time, my mom often told me about strange, ghostly experiences she'd had in the house since moving there 5 years prior. She ran a daycare from home, so she was there all day and witnessed these occurrences firsthand. They were mostly small things. Glasses clinking, water appearing in odd places, or the feeling of a hand brushing across her neck. These things didn't seem to bother her much, but I always felt an uneasy, strange vibe whenever I was there. One night, my mom, my aunt, and I decided to use a Ouija board. Big mistake. The board was active, but the messages didn't make much sense to us. After a while, we decided to stop and put it away for the night. That same night, I fell asleep in the living room and had the most intense, unsettling dream. In the dream, the 3 of us were sitting around the Ouija board just as we had been earlier. However, in the dream, there was a hole in the board. I asked what it was for, and my aunt told me we had to put our hands in it to wake up the spirits. The moment I did, I woke up abruptly, but my entire head was shaking uncontrollably from side to side. I couldn't stop it, and I couldn't open my eyes. Then, I felt hot breath on my neck and in my right ear. A man's voice hissed, "You stupid B asterisk asterisk asterisk." Asterisk, his tone was furious. The second I heard those words, my eyes snapped open, and I froze, staring at a white object floating in the middle of the room. I couldn't move as I watched it slowly fade away. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next night, I stayed at my aunt's house, thinking I'd feel safer there. But the same thing happened at the exact same time, 4 a.m. In this dream, my aunt and I were fixing her refrigerator when there was a knock at the door. A 6-year-old boy stood on the front step. My aunt turned to me, her face pale with terror, and said, "Don't let him in." Before I could react, the door swung open. The boy stood there, staring at her. She fell to her knees, paralyzed, as his gaze locked onto her. The dream was deeply unsettling, and I woke up to see a human-like figure walking across my body. I felt a heavy pressure on my chest and tried to scream for my aunt, but no sound came out. Panicked, I jumped into her bed and eventually fell asleep. As soon as I did, the ghost appeared again in my dreams. This time I was lying in my aunt's bed, and it was tormenting me. It felt like I was dreaming exactly what was happening in that moment, like I was trapped between being asleep and awake. The vividness of these dreams blurred the line between reality and imagination, and I woke up shaken to my core. For the next month, I woke up at exactly 4 a.m. every night, always from similar dreams. In these dreams, I'd be trying to communicate with the spirit. They felt so real, as if I was actually talking to it. These experiences weren't confined to my mom's house, either. It followed me wherever I went. Even now, I still experience strange occurrences. My TV turns itself back on after I've turned it off. Sometimes, I'm overwhelmed by an intense, terrifying feeling of being watched. Odd water spots appear on my bed near my feet, and I can't explain where they come from. Thankfully, these things only happen about once every 2 months now, but I can't shake the feeling that something is still with me. Is it possible that a spirit has attached itself to me? I don't know, but I can't ignore the reality of what I've experienced. It's left a lasting impression that I'll never forget. The first time I saw a ghost was during the summer of 2006 or 2007. My family and I had just moved from Sacramento, California to Springfield, Missouri. We moved into a house owned by my uncle, an old place in a not-so-great neighborhood. My cousins, who were fixing up the house at the time, shared some creepy stories about seeing floating heads inside. I didn't think much of it. After all, I hadn't seen anything myself, so I brushed it off as their imagination running wild. But it wasn't long before whatever was in the house decided to play with me. We'd only been there for 2 nights, and my cousins were still staying with us while they worked on the house. The house had 4 bedrooms upstairs, and I stayed in the one with a door leading to the attic. The attic door had 2 locks and was nearly impossible to open. We tried before but realized the only way to get it open would be to use a crowbar. That day, I was upstairs in my room, playing my new WWF game on the Xbox. My family called me down to eat, so I left everything as it was and went downstairs. I ate quickly, finishing before everyone else, and ran back upstairs to keep playing. When I got to my room, I froze. The attic door, which had been locked tightly, was now open. Just a crack, but enough to send chills down my spine. Nobody had gone upstairs while I was eating. My cousin's stories of strange sightings flooded my mind, and my imagination didn't help. Terrified, I ran into the room, slammed the attic door shut, locked it, and bolted downstairs. I waited there until my brothers and cousins finished eating so they could come back upstairs and keep me company. I thought that was the end of it, but it was only the beginning. Months passed, and my cousins eventually moved out, finding a place in the countryside near Buffalo, Missouri. I switched to a different room across the hall. For the first time ever, I had my own room, and I was a bit of a loner back then, so I rarely left the house. One sunny morning, I woke up feeling cold. Not freezing, but just enough to stay bundled under my blanket. My bed faced the wall across from my door. When I looked over, the door was wide open. I didn't think much of it, assuming one of my siblings had left it open while I was still sleeping. Then I saw him. Standing just outside the door was a figure. My eyes were blurry from just waking up, but I could clearly make out the shape of a man wearing a green army uniform. He wasn't standing on the floor, his feet hovered above it, and he was staring straight into my room. I sat up quickly, and the figure vanished. At first, I tried convincing myself it was my imagination, but a few months later, my little sister mentioned seeing something. She had been in my room when I wasn't home and said she saw an army man run past the doorway. I'd never told her what I'd seen, so how could she describe the same thing? Time passed, and we eventually discovered something that made everything chillingly real. The roof had started leaking and breaking apart, so my dad, my brothers, my cousins, my uncle, and I went up to the attic to fix it. The army man wasn't on my mind anymore, until we found his uniform. Folded neatly in a corner, there it was, a World War II veteran's uniform. Along with it were letters and documents detailing his time in the war. My stomach dropped. Everything I had seen and felt in that house was true. I told my family what I had experienced, and they believed me. My parents and another uncle prayed over the house, and not long after, we moved out. A new owner eventually bought the property and renovated it. Today, the house looks beautiful, completely new. Seeing it now, you'd never guess that it was once a place where I saw a ghost staring into my room. I've been trying to gather the courage to write about a horrific experience that happened to my infant son when he was just 2 months old. Even now, over 2 decades later, it's hard to revisit that day. In 1988, I was visiting my mom at her apartment in St. Louis, Missouri. My son, just a couple of months old at the time, wasn't even old enough to roll over. He was lying on his back beside me on my mom's bed while we talked. My mother was sitting across the room at her desk. We had been discussing my great-aunt's funeral, which I had attended when I was 16. I'm not sure why the topic came up, but it did. That funeral had its own share of strange occurrences, but that's a story for another time. My great-aunt had lived a difficult life. Growing up poor on a Missouri farm with 13 siblings, many of whom passed away from illness, she faced hardships from an early age. She once told me how, at 5 years old, she had to stand on a chair to wash dishes and help out. I loved her, but I remember her as a somewhat negative and eccentric woman. She practiced spiritualism, did card readings, and had a crystal ball. She claimed to be psychic, though whether she truly was, I'll never know. As a child, her stories and practices unnerved me. As my mom and I talked about Aunt Dorothy's funeral, something unthinkable happened. My baby suddenly levitated off the bed, straight up into the air at least 4 feet. Before I could even react, he was moved to the edge of the bed, flipped over headfirst, and slammed down violently onto his head. Something unseen held his legs straight up in the air. The entire event happened quickly, yet in my shock, it felt like slow motion. For a moment, my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. It was too surreal, too impossible. But then reality hit me, and I screamed, jumping up to grab my son. My mom, who had also seen everything, ran to us in a panic. My baby's face was bright red, scrunched in pain, his eyes bulging. Then his color began to change, ashen gray, and his lips turned blue. I'll never forget the look on his tiny face. He wasn't breathing. My heart sank. I thought he was either dead or dying, and I feared his neck might have been broken. Desperately, I started breathing into his mouth, trying to get air into his lungs. I screamed at my mom to call 911. When the paramedics arrived, I didn't know how to explain what had happened. I couldn't tell them the truth, they would never believe me. Instead, I told them my son had fallen off the bed. It was the only explanation I could come up with in my panic. We rushed to the hospital in the ambulance. Miraculously, after an examination, the ER doctor said my baby was perfectly fine. No injuries, no breathing issues, nothing. I was relieved but still terrified. After that incident, I refused to bring my son back to my mom's apartment. I couldn't even talk to her about what had happened for a long time. It was too overwhelming to process. I spent sleepless nights watching over my baby, terrified that whatever had attacked him would return. Within a month, my mom moved out of that apartment. 5 years later, my son still wasn't able to form words. He often woke up screaming in the middle of the night. His pediatrician scheduled an MRI, and what they found left me stunned. The scan revealed a severe lesion in the right hemisphere of his brain. The doctors explained that it was consistent with head trauma. They told me surgery wasn't possible, but they hoped his brain's other hemisphere might compensate over time. Today, my son is 22 years old. He's grown into an intelligent, hardworking young man. He reads at a college level and is normal in almost every way, but he has lasting effects from that trauma. He struggles with retaining spelling memory despite years of specialists and spelling programs. He also has some anger management issues which we've worked on together. I've wrestled with my faith because of that day. Raised Catholic, I've always been more spiritual than strictly religious. I can't understand why God would allow something, whether a ghost, a demon, or a poltergeist, to attack my baby. I've wondered if it could have been my great-aunt. Maybe she was angry about our conversation and lashed out in a fit of temper. She did have quite the temper in life. But I'll likely never know the truth, at least not in this lifetime. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that life exists beyond what we can perceive. The afterlife is real. I'm 100% certain of that. I don't need more proof, and I don't want more proof. For 22 years, I've searched for others who've experienced serious attacks on infants or children by unseen entities, but I haven't found any. Thank God for that. My son and I have experienced other paranormal events since that day, including poltergeist activity, more levitation episodes, and another serious attack when he was 5 years old. Thankfully, things have been relatively quiet in recent years. I understand that some people are skeptical of ghosts and the paranormal. I respect that, but as someone who has lived through it, I wish I could go back to being a skeptic myself. Life was easier when I didn't know such things were possible. But in my heart and soul, I know the truth, and it scares me to this day. I pray daily that no other family has to endure what we did. That one horrifying incident has affected our family in ways that will last a lifetime, especially for my son. I can only hope that our story helps others understand the reality of what exists beyond the world we see. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. About 12 years ago, my husband and I lived in a tiny 1947 bungalow in Columbia, Missouri, that was surprisingly full of ghosts. For such a small house, it seemed to have a lot of spiritual activity. One of the most frequent presences was a man who would pace in heavy boots back and forth in the living room, just a few yards from our bedroom. We'd often hear his stomping late at night, even though the living room had wall-to-wall carpeting at the time. Another ghost, which was much less scary, was a little dog that wandered around the house. One evening, while my husband and I were watching TV in the living room, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I glanced to my right and saw the faint, hazy figure of a white dog trotting happily out of the bedroom. It vanished after just 2 steps. I turned to my husband, wide-eyed, and asked, "Did you just see that?" He nodded and admitted he'd seen the dog several times before, but hadn't told me because he didn't want to frighten me. A year later, we found out that the previous owner had buried his dog outside our bedroom window. The most unnerving noise, however, was the loud banging that seemed to come from between the ground floor and the partially finished attic. It sounded like someone was slamming a sledgehammer against the inside of our ceiling. It happened once when my husband was away on a business trip and a few times when we were both home during the day. At first, we tried to rationalize it, thinking it might be something in the heat ducts. Later, we discovered there were no ducts between the floors. The space was solid wood, leaving no explanation for the eerie, pounding noises. Interestingly, the strange activity in the house largely subsided when we rescued 2 stray cats from our abusive neighbors. The sweet energy of our new furry companions seemed to calm the house. However, I still felt an unsettling presence at times, like a man watching me when I was in the bathroom at night, especially if the door was open. The bathroom faced the living room, which didn't help with the creepy feeling. When we decided to move, it felt like the house rebelled against us. Just 3 days before the realtor was scheduled to show the property, our air conditioner broke, and we discovered mice, or possibly bats, in the attic crawl space. On moving day, things took a chaotic turn. Our washing machine pipes exploded, flooding the laundry room off the kitchen. While I scrambled to contain the water with plastic buckets, our car's gas pump failed, leaving my husband stranded in the parking lot of a hardware store. He was there trying to buy caps for the broken pipes. With no cell phones at the time, he managed to contact a friend, who rescued him while I stayed home frantically emptying buckets to save the carpeting we had just installed 2 weeks earlier. That night, our last in the house, things got even stranger. While I was in the bathroom, I saw a 2 or 3 foot long shadow glide by. Seconds later, a massive bat appeared out of nowhere, flying wildly around the house. Terrified it would hurt our cats, I scooped them up and locked them in the bedroom. My husband grabbed a flashlight and stood on the front lawn, directing the bat out of the house like an air traffic controller. I sprinted to the back door to open it, in case it flew into the kitchen. Somehow, we managed to guide it outside, but we were left wondering how it had even gotten in. The windows were closed, the air conditioner was on, and our ceiling was solid with no vents. It felt as though the bat had materialized out of thin air. The next day, my husband had to rent a car to drive me to our new home in Kentucky before returning to Columbia to pick up our broken car after repairs. Before leaving the house for the final time, he walked through every room and even up into the attic, speaking to the house as though it were alive. He reassured it, blessed it, and promised everything would be okay. Whether his words made a difference or not, the house sold within 3 hours of us moving out. Reflecting on the experience, I can't help but think of Russian folk tales about homes having their own spirit. In these stories, if the spirit is angered, such as when the residents move, it will create obstacles and chaos. It seems that our little 1947 bungalow had its own mischievous spirit, determined to make our move as challenging as possible. The following experiences are mostly my mother's. The first one took place in Missouri when my mom was about 10 years old. Her grandmother was in the hospital, and things weren't looking good. Despite the late hour, my mom's mother stayed at the hospital with her. At home, my mom and her sister were in their shared room trying to sleep. The only other person in the house was their father, who was upstairs in the 2-story home. Late into the night, my mom and her sister were abruptly awakened by the sound of footsteps at the top of the staircase. Their bedroom door was closed, so my mom called out, "Dad!" There was no answer, but the footsteps continued, growing louder as they approached. My mom called out again, "Dad!" Still no response. The footsteps reached their bedroom door and then stopped. By now, my mom was sitting up in bed, staring at the door. Suddenly, it swung open, but no one was there. Terrified, my mom and her sister watched in disbelief as the door slowly closed on its own. My mom dove under her blanket as the footsteps retreated, descending the staircase and fading away. Not a moment later, the phone rang. Their dad answered it and called out to the girls. Their mom had just called to tell them that their grandma had passed away. The next events happened years later in Nevada at my childhood home, a house that was haunted. I've shared my own experiences from that house before, but my parents had their fair share of strange encounters there, too. One afternoon, my dad was watching TV when something disturbing caught his eye outside the window. On the patio, one of the chairs slid fluidly from one end to the other. It stayed upright the entire time, moving consistently until it reached the end of the patio. This happened in broad daylight, and there wasn't a breath of wind outside. My mom's experiences in that house were even more unnerving, and they happened repeatedly. These incidents always occurred when my dad was out of town or not in the room. The first time it happened, she was so shaken that she told me about it right away. One night, she woke up out of the blue. Almost immediately, she felt the bed sink down beside her, as if someone had sat next to her. She looked, but no one was there. An overwhelming sense of not being alone flooded her, and she froze, unable to move. For what felt like an eternity, she lay there, terrified, until the invisible presence lifted. The bed returned to normal, and the feeling of being watched disappeared as quickly as it had come. Unfortunately, this was not an isolated incident. It happened several times over the years. While the experience never worsened or caused harm, it was always unsettling. The invisible presence would sit on the bed for a short while, then leave. About 6 months ago, my mom told me it had happened again. But this time, there was a significant difference. She woke up the same way, and the bed sank down beside her as usual. But instead of the invisible presence, she saw my grandmother sitting next to her. My grandma looked at her and said, "Rachel is going to be okay." Then, as always, the sensation vanished, and everything returned to normal. My grandmother passed away 11 years ago. She was an amazing woman, and I still miss her every day. While the presence in the house may have been unsettling at times, it brought my mom comfort in that moment, knowing my grandma was there, even if just for a little while. Since moving into this house, I've experienced numerous paranormal events, but none more unsettling than my haunted double-door refrigerator. It seems to react to emotions, moaning in ways that convey agony, empathy, anger, or sadness. A psychic who came to investigate the strange occurrences recorded the sounds it made. When played at a slower speed, you could clearly hear words like murdered and killed. It was chilling. If anyone has the courage to take this refrigerator off my hands, it's free. It works perfectly fine, except for the unnerving moaning and groaning. Some might say it's just a failing motor, but one day, when I turned around and yelled at it to shut the F*** up, it responded by growing louder. The sound shifted to an overbearingly angry mumbling, like it was trying to articulate something straight out of a horror movie. I left the house immediately and only returned because a friend agreed to spend the night. He didn't last another night after that. I've only heard that intense, angry mumbling twice, but that's twice too many. Anyone who spends extended time in this house eventually agrees. It's haunted. Aside from the refrigerator, I hear muffled voices that I can never locate. I was hesitant to admit it to anyone until the psychic confirmed hearing the same sounds during one of her visits. That was the same visit when she made the recording of the refrigerator's chilling words. The haunting extends beyond sound. I felt touches like electric chills running across my skin. One morning, I woke up to find marks on the insides of my thighs, finger-like impressions, as if someone had tried to force my legs apart. For the next 3 days, I experienced agonizing pain, as though my intestines were trying to push through my rectum. Just as I was about to go to the emergency room, the pain subsided on its own. The strange occurrences are not limited to physical sensations. Lights dim and brighten erratically, but the phenomenon stops whenever I turn on a Christian TV broadcast. It's not an issue of faulty wiring. The dimming and brightening follow me from room to room, even across different breakers. The DVD player stops as if someone pressed the button, fans oscillate on their own, and objects fall off hooks for no apparent reason. Sudden, strong smells often fill the air, sometimes like an unwashed man, other times a heavy cologne, even outside on the deck during the day. My dog reacts to things only he can see, his gaze following something around the room. Last night, the refrigerator began moaning in a new, sorrowful tone, which eventually sent my dog into complete panic mode. I've seen him react to unseen things many times before, but last night was different. It terrified him. The refrigerator, I'm convinced, brought one of the spirits with it when it arrived. I bought it used from my landlord. For weeks, I thought the moaning was coming from the basement because the fridge sits near the basement door. Eventually, I realized the sound was emanating from the refrigerator itself. Soon after moving in, while taking a bath, I distinctly heard someone call my name twice. At first, I convinced myself I was mistaken, but it was unmistakably clear both times. In the early weeks, I heard footsteps on the creaky kitchen boards late at night. On 3 separate occasions, something bumped the back of my desk chair so hard I thought someone was standing behind me. Each time, I jumped up to look, only to find no one there. The psychic I called to investigate set up equipment while I was away at work one day. On her initial visit, she described seeing multiple spirits. A well-dressed, tall man standing in the kitchen doorway, whom she thought might be my recently deceased childhood sweetheart. A man in the bathroom attached to an object there, an old woman, and a very unhappy little girl in the hallway. Though she recorded evidence and described what she saw, she didn't provide a follow-up report or research the house's history. However, others have claimed it's haunted. A local grass cutter once told me his friend refused to enter the house, saying, "That place is haunted." The house had been abandoned for years before my landlord bought and renovated it. The design is strange. The floor is raised, requiring a step down into the kitchen, and my 5 feet 9 inches son can nearly touch the ceiling with his hand. A couple who lived here briefly after the renovation warned me to leave, cryptically citing uneven floors as their reason. The most intolerable aspect for me is the moaning refrigerator. While some may blame the motor, I know better. I've recorded the sounds multiple times on my phone, and no one who listens to them has a doubt that something paranormal is at play. If you have the stomach for it and want to experience the paranormal firsthand, you can take the refrigerator for free. It's in good working condition, aside from the sounds. Oh, and there's more. This house was on the Underground Railroad, helping enslaved people find freedom. There's a dirt-filled crawl space in the house where a room should be. A small window lets you peer inside. I don't know what happened there, but I can't help wondering about its history. After the refrigerator is gone, I'm bringing in a priest to bless the house. I wish I could have done that yesterday. I've always been adventurous, but this house, and especially the fridge, has exceeded my limits. I want to start by saying I'm not crazy, nor am I embellishing this story even a little. Every word is true. I've told very few people about this because I've always considered myself a logical, practical thinker. But yesterday, something as simple as a stubborn bathroom door triggered this memory, and I felt compelled to share it.